Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Echoes Beneath the Scorching Sand. The desert stretched endlessly before me, a harsh expanse of cracked earth and biting winds that bore down like a vengeful spirit. I had come to this desolate place for a sense of adventure, to find the thrill that had long since evaporated from my life. They had called it an escape, a chance to break free from the mundane and find something real. But reality can be a cruel teacher, especially in a place like this. I parked my truck at a weathered rest area, just a rickety sign and a few splintered benches standing guard against the relentless sun. The landscape felt both familiar and foreign, like a dream that had turned nightmares, and the shadows cast by the low-hanging clouds seemed to whisper secrets I wasn't meant to hear. Ahead, a narrow dirt path wound into the heart of the desert, a promise of discovery that seemed to taunt me. I could feel the heat radiating off the ground as I stepped out of the cab, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. My water bottle, half filled, dangled from my belt, and I clutched it like a talisman against the oppressive dryness. The sky was painted an unsettling orange, the kind that hinted at more than just the sun setting. It felt as if the world was holding its breath. As I walked down the path, the wind picked up, swirling dust around me, gritty and invasive. I turned my collar up, shielding my neck from the harshness, but it did little to alleviate the creeping unease that settled in my gut. I had read about the desert's beauty, its undulating dunes and pristine silence, but there was an undercurrent of danger here, an intangible weight that pressed against my chest. The silence enveloped me, thick and suffocating. I had expected solitude, but this felt different. It was a silence that whispered, a voice that seemed to echo from the rocks, from the very ground beneath my feet. I paused, straining to hear, but the only sound was the faint rustle of the wind. I shook my head, dismissing the absurdity of it all. Maybe I was just being paranoid, a product of too many horror stories in too little time. Hours passed as I ventured deeper into the desert, each step taking me further from the rest area and closer to an unsettling vastness. The light began to fade, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced like specters at the periphery of my vision. I knew I should turn back, but the call of the unknown was intoxicating. I pressed on, convinced that something waited for me over the next rise. Then I saw it, a silhouette against the dimming light. A structure, barely discernible at first, but growing clearer as I approached. It was a shack, its wooden frame weathered and splintered, the paint peeling in curling strips like the skin of a neglected wound. The door swung slightly on rusted hinges, creaking eerily in the rising wind. I felt a chill race down my spine, but curiosity propelled me forward, my feet moving almost of their own volition. I stepped onto the porch, the wood groaning under my weight, and peered inside. The darkness enveloped me, an oppressive void that swallowed light. I fished out my flashlight, its beam slicing through the inky blackness. Dust motes danced in the air, illuminated like tiny stars trapped in a forgotten universe. As I scanned the room, I found remnants of a life long abandoned, a rickety table, 2 chairs, and a torn-up couch that sagged like a weary animal. But it was the wall that caught my attention. Faded photographs were tacked there, pictures of families, smiling faces frozen in time. The eyes of the children in those images seemed to follow me, dark and hollow, a sense of abandonment echoing in their gazes. I felt a shiver of unease creeping up my spine, a primal instinct warning me that I was intruding on something that was never meant to be disturbed. Just as I was about to step back outside, a sound punctured the silence, a faint scuttling, like tiny claws scratching against wood. My heart raced as I turned, the flashlight beam playing across the room. I told myself it was just an animal, a mouse or a lizard, but deep down, I knew that this place held darker secrets than that. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, and I felt a surge of dread wash over me. A rustling sound came from behind the couch, and instinct kicked in. I backed away slowly, my breath quickening. As I reached for the door, the scratching stopped. An unsettling stillness settled over the shack, thick and suffocating. My fingers found the doorknob, but before I could twist it, a low growl emanated from the shadows, a sound that curled my stomach. The growl grew closer, and in that moment, I understood whatever lay behind the couch was not merely an animal. I bolted from the shack, adrenaline propelling me forward, heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck. The engine roared to life as I jumped inside, slamming the door behind me. The desert night closed in, a dark blanket of uncertainty wrapping around me, and as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had disturbed something ancient, something waiting just beyond the shadows, a horror that thrived in the desolation. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the skeletal remains of the desert. I had always been drawn to the vastness of the wilderness, but after my first night alone under that suffocating sky, I felt the weight of its emptiness like a shroud. The wind carried whispers of a past I never wanted to know, wrapping around me, beckoning me deeper into its desolation. For hours, I trudged through the coarse sand, each step feeling heavier than the last. My throat burned, my lips cracked under the relentless sun. I thought of how I had come here, how I had willingly left the comfort of my life to chase an adventure in solitude. But solitude had morphed into isolation, and the thrill I once felt was now a distant echo, replaced by an urgency to escape. I had set up camp at the edge of a dried-up wash, where the land dipped like the belly of a giant. The first night, I felt a sense of peace as I ate an impromptu dinner of trail mix and jerky, staring at the stars that pierced the darkness like shards of glass. But peace had long since fled, vanishing with the sun, and with it came an unsettling realization: I was now alone. It began as a flicker in my peripheral vision, a silhouette darting between the scraggly bushes. I dismissed it as a trick of the light or perhaps a small animal, but later, as the shadows thickened, a chill slithered down my spine. I could feel eyes on me, watching from the darkness beyond the fire's flickering glow. I told myself it was paranoia, a side effect of too much isolation and too little water. But then I heard it. A soft rustling sound, like footsteps crunching over gravel, echoed in the stillness. My heart raced, the sound unfurling in my chest as I gripped the handle of my knife, the only thing standing between me and whatever lurked out there. I peered into the blackness, but all I saw were the skeletal branches of the desert scrub swaying in the wind. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the expanse. Silence answered, thick and suffocating. I forced myself to breathe deeply, to focus on the mundane, the crackling fire, the warmth on my face. Still, my mind spiraled as I pondered the possibilities. Was it a coyote? A javelina? Or something far worse? The thought paralyzed me, and I pulled my knees to my chest, listening intently. Night after night, I heard it rustling, whispering, always just beyond the reach of the firelight. On the fourth day, I decided to hike deep into the desert, hoping to uncover the source of my terror. I trekked far, the landscape transforming into a surreal blend of reds and browns, the sun like a molten orb overhead. Sweat dripped down my back, but I pushed past the fatigue, driven by a mix of curiosity and dread. I stumbled upon an old, abandoned shack, its wooden walls weathered and cracked. There was something compelling about it, a corner of the desert that felt frozen in time. I approached cautiously, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight. The air hung heavy with dust and something else, not quite rot, but an ancient, forgotten fragrance that sent shivers down my spine. Inside, the walls were adorned with faded photographs, unfamiliar faces frozen in expressions of despair. They were all staring at something, or someone, just off camera, their joy marred by an unshakable sorrow. As I traced the edges of the photographs with trembling fingers, a noise outside sent me jumping back, a low growl, deep and rumbling like the earth itself. My heart raced as I dashed to the window, peering out, desperate to catch a glimpse of whatever had produced that sound. But nothing was there, just the rolling dunes, undisturbed yet charged with an electric tension. The sun dipped lower, and as shadows lengthened, I felt the urge to leave, something primal urging me to run. I turned to escape, but stopped when I noticed movement at the edge of my vision. A figure stood in the distance, just beyond the shack, shrouded in the twilight. My breath caught in my throat. Did it see me? I squinted, trying to discern its features, but it melted into the shadows, becoming one with the encroaching night. Panic set in as I fled the shack, stumbling over the uneven ground. I could hear something following me, a presence that danced just out of sight, taunting me. I burst into a sprint, the sand shifting beneath my feet like quicksand, threatening to swallow me whole. The dry wind howled, carrying with it the scent of something foul, something dead. I reached my campsite, collapsing next to the fire, desperately fanning the flames. I could hear it now, whispers weaving through the air, a language I couldn't decipher but felt in my bones. I sat there, trembling, the knife clutched tightly in my hand, praying that whatever was out there would not find me. Hours passed, and the fire flickered low, shadows dancing like grotesque specters against the tent. I felt the urge to sleep, but sleep was a luxury I could not afford. Instead, I listened, every crackle of the dying fire amplifying my fear. Then came the sound of scratching, sharp and insistent, against the side of my tent, like nails scraping against canvas. Each sound turned my blood to ice. The whispers grew closer, wrapping around me, filling my mind with dread. The terror of being hunted consumed me. My heart raced as I held my breath, waiting for the inevitable. I understood now the desert was alive, and it had a hunger. I was nothing more than a fleeting moment in its vast history, and with each passing hour, I began to fear I might not be alone for long. The thin veneer of sanity cracked as I realized the truth. There was no escaping the desert, not from its haunting presence, and not from the thing that now stalked me. The vastness of the desert enveloped me, an oppressive blanket of silence and heat. The sun hung high in the sky, a relentless overseer casting long shadows that danced and flickered like specters on the cracked earth. I trudged through the sand, my feet sinking into its warm embrace, the weight of the last few days pressing down on me like the suffocating heat. I had lost track of time, but I could feel the familiar pangs of hunger gnawing at my stomach. I had not eaten since the morning I awoke beneath the twisted branches of the gnarled tree, the one that still haunted my thoughts, each knotted limb reminding me of the night's terrors. With every step away from that cursed place, I hoped to distance myself from whatever had lurked there, but the memories seemed to cling like a shadow. My throat burned, parched and dry, each breath a labor, the air thick with the taste of earth and despair. I had been a fool to wander so far off the beaten path, but the thrill of exploration had always been my downfall when I hoped to rectify. I could almost convince myself that a road lay ahead, a promise of civilization and safety, but every time I glanced around, I was met with the same desolate panorama. As I walked, faint whispers of wind carried the sense of decay and dust through the dry air. I squinted into the horizon, searching for anything, an oasis, a structure, a sign of life. But the desert had swallowed everything in its relentless grasp, leaving only the specter of hope behind. Just as I was about to succumb to despair, a shape emerged in the distance, barely discernible. I shielded my eyes against the sun, squinting until the mirage solidified into something real. A crumbling building, its walls bleached by the sun, loomed ahead, rising out of the sand like a forgotten monument. My heart quickened, a mix of relief and unease flooding my senses. Cautiously, I approached, each step measured as the wind howled around me, as if warning me to turn back. The structure was a ghost of a once vibrant place, its windows shattered, its door hanging askew. I could feel the weight of the past pressing down on me, a throbbing reminder of all that had transpired in this forsaken land. I pushed open the door, the creak echoing through the stillness. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that broke through the broken windows, illuminating the remnants of a life abandoned. Old furniture lay scattered, covered in layers of dust. The air carried a stale smell, a mix of mildew and something else that made my stomach churn. I stepped inside, hesitating as I crossed the threshold, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling with foreboding. Once, I might have dismissed it as mere superstition, but now, every instinct screamed at me to leave. Still, I needed to rest, to gather my thoughts and find some sustenance. I explored the building, wary of what might linger within its walls. The walls were plastered with peeling wallpaper, faded floral patterns that clashed with the desolation around me. My fingers brushed against the texture, and a shiver raced down my spine. I felt like an intruder in a tomb, trespassing on memories better left buried. In one of the back rooms, I stumbled upon a small kitchen. The countertops were littered with broken glass, shattered plates, and remnants of moldy food. I swallowed hard, the sight of the spoiling food turning my stomach. I rifled through the cabinets, hoping for something edible, but found only rusted cans, their labels faded beyond recognition. Just as despair began to crawl in again, I heard a faint sound, like the scuttling of small feet. My heart raced as I spun around, looking for the source. The noise echoed again, louder this time, rattling my nerves. I stepped cautiously toward the sound, my breath hitching as I opened another door leading to what must have been a pantry. The sight that met my eyes sent a wave of nausea rolling through me. A small creature, a rat, darted across the floor, its beady eyes glinting in the sparse light. Relief washed over me for only a moment before the shadows deepened around me. I didn't care much for rats, but I was desperate enough to consider it. Just as I was about to leave, a noise came from somewhere deeper within the building, a thudding sound that resonated through the walls. My heart raced as I froze, the shadows creeping closer, wrapping around me like a predator closing in on its prey. I held my breath, straining to listen. The thudding grew louder, rhythmic and deliberate, as if someone or something was moving towards me. I backed away slowly, my instinct screaming for me to run. The noise continued, punctuated by a low growl that seemed to rumble from the very foundation of the house. My pulse quickened, and I glanced back at the door, contemplating my escape. But the growl was now accompanied by a heavy, dragging sound, a scraping that sent chills down my spine. Panic surged through me as I rushed for the door, the weight of the darkness behind me propelling me forward. As I burst through the threshold and out into the scorching sun, I heard the sound of something crashing against the wall behind me, the building groaning under pressure, but I didn't stop. I ran, the soft sand shifting under my feet as I sprinted away from the horror I could only imagine was now unleashed within that forsaken structure. The sun beat down, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I fled, the shadows of my nightmares chasing me into the unforgiving expanses of the desert. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape that had been my home for the last 2 days. As evening fell, the desert's heat began to retreat, but an unsettling chill seeped into the air. I stood on the porch of the dilapidated cabin, my heart racing with a mix of exhaustion and impending dread. I could hear the wind whispering through the dry brush, each gust carrying with it a hollow echo of the nightmares I could scarcely fathom. My second night alone in this forsaken place had proven even more unsettling than the first. The feeling of being watched had intensified, as if a presence loomed just beyond the periphery of the dimming light. I tried to convince myself that it was merely a trick of my imagination, worn thin by isolation. Still, the prickling sensation along my spine persisted, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often than not. In the fading daylight, I recalled the old photographs I had discovered in the cabin's creaking drawers, images of a family who once thrived here, smiling faces nearly obscured by dust. Their eyes, however, seemed to follow me, filled with an unsettling recognition that turned my stomach. I wondered who they were and what had driven them away, or, worse, what had claimed them. Deciding to clear my head, I wandered into the remnants of the garden behind the cabin. Bones of long-dead plants jutted up from the cracked earth, their skeletal remains reaching for a sky that held no promise of rain. I knelt beside a twisted root that had somehow survived, wanting to feel something alive in this barren wasteland. A soft crunch broke the silence, and I froze, my heart pounding again. I stood, scanning the horizon. The air was thick with tension, and there it was again, a faint sound, like the brittle laughter of a child echoing across the dunes. A chill ran down my spine, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I turned slowly, every instinct screaming at me to retreat, but curiosity bonded my feet to the ground. I forced myself to breathe steadily as I ventured a few steps toward the sound. There it was again, a soft giggle, almost playful. The sun's last rays flickered, and shadows danced menacingly around me, shaping into ghostly figures that taunted my every step. I stumbled backward, my pulse racing, the laughter abruptly ceasing as if it had never been there. I took a deep breath, turning back to the cabin. It was madness to think I could stay here longer, yet I had no choice. My vehicle was still stuck in the sand, and I felt that same strange compulsion pulling me to this place. As the darkness fell, the world around me morphed into something unrecognizable, a vast wasteland that closed in like a noose. Inside the cabin, I lit a lantern, the flickering flame casting dancing shadows against the walls, chasing away the encroaching darkness. Sitting at the rickety table, I pulled out my notebook and tried to focus on my thoughts, but the image of the smiling faces haunted me. They were an echo of a time long gone, but their absence loomed large, as if they were waiting to be acknowledged. Hours slipped by, and the wind began to howl outside, rattling the old walls. I was jolted from my thoughts as I heard something, a scratching sound, soft but insistent, coming from the door. My heart leaped into my throat. I had locked it, hadn't I? The old lock was rusty, but I had been sure to secure it after the last night. The scratching continued, a rhythmic tap against the weathered wood. I grabbed a nearby chair, my hands trembling as I edged toward the door. The lantern's light flickered ominously, as if urging me to turn back. I paused, listening intently. The sound transformed, morphing into a low whimper, then into muffled phrases that seemed to taunt me. "Help, help me." The voice was faint, almost childlike, a desperate plea that twisted my heart into knots. Without thinking, I opened the door a crack, peering out into the inky blackness. Nothing but shadows stared back at me. "Hello?" I called out, hoping against hope it was someone in trouble, but the air was still, oppressive. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a flicker of movement just beyond the reach of my lantern's glow. Something small and hunched crept forward, its form barely distinguishable from the darkness. I forced myself to step outside, the cool air biting at my skin, but curiosity pulled me further away from the safety of the cabin. "Who's there?" I called, my voice wavering. As I moved closer, I could see it more clearly, a small figure, gaunt and frail, crouched before me. It was a child, their clothes tattered and dirty, dirt smudging their cheeks. But it was the eyes that drew me in, wide and hollow, with an unsettling emptiness that sent ripples of fear coursing through me. "Please," the child whispered, the voice barely a breath. "Help me." A surge of adrenaline rushed through me as I reached out. "Where are your parents? Are you lost?" But before I could take another step, the child flinched back, their eyes darting to the ground. I was puzzled, but suddenly, the wind shifted, carrying with it a rancid odor that made my stomach churn. I caught a glimpse of something behind the child, a darkness that loomed, a mass that writhed and seemed to pulse, beckoning me to step closer. My instinct screamed that I needed to retreat, but the child's eyes locked onto mine, pleading. Then, without warning, the child let out a shriek and bolted into the darkness, disappearing into the night. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat, the wind howling around me, the laughter echoing again, a cruel mockery of my concern. I stumbled back into the cabin, slamming the door shut and locking it tight. I leaned against it, my heart thunderous in my chest. The desert had taken many things, but this night, as shadows danced and the wind howled outside, it threatened to claim me as well. With only the flickering light of the lantern to keep the darkness at bay, I knew I was running out of time. The sun dipped low in the sky, painting the vast expanse of the desert in hues of crimson and gold. I stood at the edge of the dry riverbed, the cracked earth beneath my feet whispering tales of long-forgotten storms. The silence enveloped me, thick like the weight of dread pressing against my chest. 3 days. 3 days since I'd stumbled into this hell, and still no sign of hope. The horizon shimmered, waves of heat distorting reality, and I fought the urge to shake my head, to clear the mirage of the landscapes moaning around me. My supplies were dwindling, the water in my canteen nearly gone. I tilted it, listening to the last few drops dance along the metal interior. I had to find shelter soon, or I wouldn't survive the night. My mind wandered again to Dan, my brother, who had followed me into this wretched expanse just days before. I could still hear his voice echoing in my thoughts, his laughter carried on the warm wind like a ghost. Just a little adventure, Jake, he had insisted, his enthusiasm contagious. What could possibly go wrong? Everything, it turned out. I was sure of that now, as I scanned my surroundings, trying to remember which way I had come. A thin veil of unease wrapped around me, tightening with every breath I took, and I cursed myself for letting him talk me into this trip. I hadn't been prepared for the bone-deep despair of isolation, the relentless sun that beat down mercilessly. The memory of Dan's face, his laughter cut short, clawed at my heart. I had to find him. With each step, I swallowed the rising panic that threatened to consume me. The dry air made my throat ache, and the subtle tremors in my hands spoke of fear and dehydration. Shadows grew long as the sun surrendered to night, and the darkening sky transformed the desert into a place of otherworldly silence. It was then, in that heavy stillness, that I heard it, a low rumble, distant yet palpable, like the growl of an unseen beast. I froze, the sound reverberating through my bones. It came again, accompanied by a vibration that shook the earth beneath me. My instinct screamed at me to run, but curiosity held me in place. Was it the echo of a storm, or something far more sinister? I strained to listen, my breath catching in my throat as the sound faded, replaced by an eerie silence so profound that every heartbeat felt like thunder. Then, I saw it, a flicker of movement at the edge of the horizon. At first, I thought it was a trick of the fading light, my mind conjuring illusions from the depths of despair. But as I focused, the figure became clearer, rising from the sandy wasteland like a mirage. My heart raced as I squinted against the brightening stars, trying to discern what I was seeing. A man, or what appeared to be a man, stooped, shuffling along the barren terrain, his clothes tattered and dusty, blending into the desolation. I called out, my voice trembling. "Hey! Over here!" He turned, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of hope spark within me. Perhaps he was a fellow wanderer, someone lost like me. But as he drew closer, I noticed the haunting hollowness of his eyes, the grim cast of his face. The wind carried a terrible stench, the sour odor of decay and something else I couldn't place. My stomach turned, instinct urging me to retreat, but a twisted sense of obligation pulled me forward. "Are you okay?" I asked, cautious yet hopeful. He opened his mouth, but no words came out, only a rasping breath that sent shivers down my spine. His lips cracked and bleeding, the skin pulling taut against his teeth. I took a step back, the realization hitting me that whatever this was, it was not normal. Not human. Then, as if sensing my fear, he lunged. I turned to run, adrenaline surging through my veins. The world became a blur as I sprinted across the sand, the sound of my own ragged breath drowning out everything else. I stumbled, nearly tripping over a hidden rock, but I forced myself onward, darting between the sparse cacti, their thorny arms grasping at me like skeletal fingers. I didn't look back. I could hear footsteps behind me, dragging and heavy, and instinct told me to keep moving, to find shelter, to survive. I didn't know where I was headed, only that I had to escape. The unmistakable chill of night crept in as I finally spotted a cluster of rocks up ahead. I dove behind them, pressing my back against the rugged surface, my heart hammering in my chest. I tried to steady my breathing, forcing myself to listen, waiting for the sound of his approach. Silence fell over the desert once more, thick and suffocating. Minutes passed like hours, the weight of the darkness pressing down on me. I peered around the stone, searching for any sign of the figure. Nothing. My pulse slowed, and I closed my eyes, grateful for the momentary reprieve. But the stillness was deceptive. The desert was alive, pulsating with unseen horrors. I could feel it in my bones, a gnawing sense of dread that told me I was not alone. As I opened my eyes, moonlight illuminated the rocks, casting long shadows that danced around me. I strained to listen again, and this time, the whispers were unmistakable, faint, like distant laughter, echoing through the night. It wasn't just a figure. There was something else out here. Something waiting. The desert had ears, and it was listening. I realized, with a sinking dread, that my adventure was far from over. It had only just begun. Story 2, Voices Beneath the Skin. I had always been a skeptic, a practical woman who preferred the surety of science over the shadows of superstition. When I first heard the old tales of possession whispered among the locals of Grey Hollow, I chuckled them off as relics of a bygone era. The idea that a person could be taken over by a malevolent spirit seemed laughable, a story to scare children into behaving. However, that all changed the night I met Amy. Amy was the daughter of one of my patients, a frail woman who lay in the hospital battling cancer. Amy had been her caregiver, and as her mother's condition worsened, I noticed something unsettling about her. It crept into the room with a stale odor and left a chill in the air. The light in her eyes dimmed, replaced with a vacant gaze that sent shivers down my spine. I watched her become a shell of herself. It was as if something had latched onto her, drinking from her spirit. The first time I noticed it was during a routine visit. I entered the room, clipboard in hand, ready to discuss her mother's treatment. As I spoke, Amy sat in the corner, staring at the wall with her mouth slightly agape. When I finally turned to her, she blinked, snapping out of whatever trance had held her captive. "Sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was just thinking." "About what?" I asked, trying to steer the conversation back into more familiar territory. "Nothing important," she replied, but her eyes darted away, avoiding mine. The days turned into weeks, and each visit became increasingly unsettling. Conversation slipped through her fingers like sand, and each time I encountered her, there was something more off about her demeanor. I could not help but wonder if her mother's deteriorating health had consumed her, leaving her vulnerable to an unseen force. One evening, as I was leaving the hospital, I noticed Amy standing outside, framed against the pale yellow glow of a street lamp. She was muttering to herself, her hands clenched into fists. I approached her cautiously, a sense of dread coiling in my gut. "Amy?" I called softly, but she didn't respond. Her lips moved rhythmically as if reciting a prayer, but the words were distorted, a cacophony of sounds that twisted in the night air. "Amy," I said more firmly. She spun around, her eyes now dark and hollow, reflecting nothing of the girl I once knew. "Doctor," she said, her voice a mix of panic and something else, something darker. "You need to help me." "What's wrong?" I asked, half expecting her to shrug it off, as she often did. But this time, there was no evasion. "It's my mother," she said. There's something inside of her. It's not her. It wants out. The weight of her words pressed down on me, and I felt the shivers crawl along my spine. Amy, your mother is sick. It's the medication. It's affecting her mind. No, she insisted, her voice rising, filled with urgency. I've seen it. I can feel it. It wants to take me too. I tried to reason with her, gently guiding her back towards logic. You're under a lot of stress. It's normal to feel overwhelmed in situations like this. But she shook her head violently. You don't understand. You have to believe me. Please, I'm losing her. And I'm losing myself. I could see the tears forming in her eyes, panic rising like a tide. Against my better judgment, I offered her my phone. Call someone. Talk to your friends, anyone who can help you through this. As she took the phone, her grip was too tight, her knuckles turning white. I don't want to talk to anyone. I want you to help me. I hesitated, my heart racing as I thought of 100 ways this could spiral out of control. Amy, I am a doctor, not a therapist or a priest. I can't help with. But she cut me off, her voice dropping to a low hiss. It already knows you're here. You won't be safe. The words echoed in my mind long after I'd driven home. I tried to shake off the unease, but it clung to me like a second skin. Was she losing her mind? Or was something far more sinister lurking in the shadows of Grey Hollow? I had never believed in possessions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Amy was a warning. A warning I didn't quite know how to heed. The thought hung in my mind like a vulture, waiting for the right moment to strike, and for the first time, I felt a shiver of fear thread its way into my skepticism. The nights grew longer and darker, filled with dreams I couldn't remember but woke from gasping for breath. Each time I closed my eyes, I felt as though I was being watched. It was a suffocating sensation, a creeping paranoia that nestled deep within me. Then, in the cold grip of a particularly restless night, the phone rang. The sound fractured the silence like a gunshot, jolting me awake. Heart pounding, I stumbled to answer her. It's Amy, her voice came through, thin and trembling. Doctor, please, she's gone. The panic tightened its hold on my chest as I quickly calculated the time. What do you mean, gone? The spirit, it took her. I can feel it. Help me, please, she begged. There was a desperation in her voice, and the weight of dread crashed down upon me like a heavy fog. I knew then that I couldn't turn away. Something had changed in those few moments, and I was drawn into a world I had once dismissed as mere folklore. But as I slipped into the night, the question loomed large. Could I help save Amy, or would I, too, fall prey to whatever dark force had set its sights on her? The wind howled outside, rattling the old window panes of my bedroom. I had almost gotten used to the sounds of the storm since settling back in my childhood home, but the relentless gusts tugging at the shutters felt different tonight. They seemed to echo my growing unease, amplifying the shadows that danced across the walls. I had spent my first evening back staring at the family photos lining the hallway, images of happier times when laughter filled the air. Now, the house felt more like a tomb than a home, each creak of the floorboards whispering secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. My father had died just weeks ago, and it was only now, sifting through the wreckage of my childhood, that I began to realize how little I actually knew him. Memories had been buried under years of distance, but the feeling of dread that surfaced felt all too familiar. It was in the early hours of the morning when I first heard it. A faint scratching, like fingernails dragging over wood. I sat up in bed, straining to listen, but the sound ceased as abruptly as it had begun. My heart raced as I glanced at the door, its chipped paint flaking off in the dim light. I told myself it was just the house settling, but a chill snaked down my spine. I lay back down, forcing myself to breathe steadily, but sleep eluded me. Instead, I drifted into a half-conscious state, where dreams twisted into nightmares. I saw flashes of my father, a man once filled with warmth and laughter, now reduced to a ghostly figure draped in shadows. His face contorted in agony, as if pleading for help that I couldn't give. When I awoke, the sun was already high, piercing through the gloom of the room. I swallowed hard, shaken by the vividness of the dreams, yet I couldn't shake the connection they had to the old stories whispered in our family. The rumors of possession had always been dismissed as folklore, tales meant to frighten children. Yet, as I delved deeper into the memories of my father's decline, I began to wonder if there was more than just superstition behind those tales. Over breakfast, I pulled out the box of old letters and journals stored in the attic. I sought to piece together the puzzle of my father's life, hoping to find clues about the man I barely recognized in those final years. The pages were yellowed and fragile, each one filled with scrawled memories, half-formed thoughts, and spiritual musings. Something about the tone shifted midway through the collection. I felt the hair rise on my arms as I read the first mention of the darkness that had begun to invade his thoughts. It was more than mere melancholy. It felt alive, as if it had a voice, a will of its own. The ink grew frantic as he described nights filled with whispers, shadows that moved when he wasn't looking, and an ever-pressing weight on his chest that suffocated his breath. My heart raced as I stumbled over the words, realizing the descriptions mirrored the stories I'd heard countless times as a child, stories about possessions that led to despair. The fear that had once seemed so far removed now perched at the edges of my conscience, creeping ever closer. Days passed in a blur, sorting through memories and confronting truths that rattled my understanding of reality. I felt as if I were walking a tightrope stretched across an abyss, teetering between skepticism and belief. My nights grew restless. I often heard the scratching again, and sometimes I could swear I saw fleeting shadows in the corners of my vision. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I decided to venture into the basement. My father had always insisted that the basement was off limits, but curiosity gnawed at me, demanding I uncover whatever secrets it held. Armed with nothing but a flashlight, I descended the creaking wooden stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The basement welcomed me with the smell of damp earth and mildew. Boxes lay scattered, filled with remnants of a life long forgotten. I searched the space, disturbed by the sense of being watched, and found an old trunk in the corner, hidden beneath a layer of dust. With trembling hands, I pried it open, revealing a medley of trinkets and aged books. One book stood out. It was bound in cracked leather, its spine almost crumbling. I opened it carefully, flipping through pages filled with strange symbols and incantations. My pulse quickened. Each line felt like a warning, a testament to ancient rituals performed in desperation against the encroaching darkness. I heard a sound then, a soft whisper, so faint I nearly dismissed it. But something in the tone sent chills racing down my spine. It called my name, a voice that was both familiar and foreign, echoing through the darkness. I froze, my breath hitching as I strained to listen. "Help me." The plea twisted in my gut, pulling me deeper into the abyss of uncertainty. The shadows around me seemed to thicken, curling around my feet, threatening to ensnare me in their grasp. I stumbled back, my heart pounding wildly against my rib cage. "Stop," I stammered into the gloom, but the voice only grew stronger, more insistent, clawing at my consciousness. "Help me." I turned and fled, bursting back up the stairs, the darkness clawing at my heels. I slammed the door behind me, sealing the basement's secrets away but leaving the terror lingering just beyond the threshold. In the solitude of my room, I fought against the rising tide of panic. I was not equipped to deal with this. I needed help. But whom could I trust? The stories from childhood echoed ominously in my mind as I lay curled in bed, the shadows growing thicker once more, and the scratching returned, more pronounced, more deliberate. I could feel it, pressing against the boundaries of my sanity. Tomorrow would be different. I would reach out, seek someone who knew. Someone who could help me confront whatever had taken root in my father, and perhaps even in the dark corners of my own mind. But for now, I succumbed to the darkness surrounding me, knowing I was not alone anymore. The air in the old house thickened with an unsettling stillness, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I had thought the worst was behind me after my confrontation with the shadows in the basement, but as I lay in bed that night, sleep took on an elusive quality. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves beyond the cracked window, sent chills racing down my spine. I could almost hear whispers, interwoven with the wind, their meanings slipping through my grasp like smoke. It was in the early hours of the morning when I awoke, drenched in sweat and suffocated by an unknown dread. My clock glowed a sinister 3 a.m., marking the witching hour, the time when the veil between worlds was thinnest. I sat up, heart pounding, listening intently. Outside, the world was shrouded in night, a blanket of darkness spooling out forever. I sensed it before I saw it, a chill, so sudden it cut through the heat of my nightmares. The air shifted in my room, a cold breath that seemed to emanate from the very shadows. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and stood, a helpless marionette tugged by unseen strings. My feet were bare against the wooden floor, and for a moment, I remained still, weighing my fears against the urge to explore. Compelled by something beyond my control, I stepped forward. As I passed through the hallway, a flickering light beckoned from the basement door. The dull thud of my heart echoed in my ears, and each step toward the staircase felt like an act of betrayal against my instincts. The door hung slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I could have turned back, could have pretended it was mere imagination, but I felt drawn, as if the shadows were calling my name. The rickety stairs creaked beneath my weight as I descended, each step an invocation of whatever lingered just out of sight. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, and the smell of damp earth filled my lungs. I reached for the light switch, but it crumbled beneath my fingers, leaving me in an impenetrable gloom. Panic rooted me for a moment until I remembered the flashlight on my workbench. I fumbled through the darkness until my fingers brushed against the smooth, cold surface. The beam flickered to life, washing the room in a pale glow that bent the darkness around it. My breath hitched as I scanned the space. The walls were lined with tools and old furniture draped in sheets, like ghosts confined to their silent prison. But it was the far corner, cloaked in shadow, that drew my attention. A faint scratching emerged from there, a sound that made my skin crawl. It resembled fingernails raking against wood, desperate and unrelenting. I moved closer, my heartbeat a thunderous drum in the silence. The scratching ceased, replaced by a low, guttural murmur that slithered through the air. I shined my flashlight in the corner, revealing a figure hunched over my own reflection, warped and twisted. It couldn't be me. This shadow bore expressions I had never worn. The eyes were sunken, hollow pits that glimmered with malevolence, and the smile that spread across its face was not mine. I stumbled backward, breathless, my mind racing to comprehend the horror before me. It was as if I were staring in a mirror reflecting my darkest fears without restraint. Memories I had buried surged forth, images of guilt and isolation that threatened to pull me under. Then I recalled the tales of possession I had dismissed as folklore, warning of entities that fed on despair. I turned to flee, but the basement door slammed shut of its own accord, trapping me in the dark. Panic clawed at my throat as the whispering intensified, a cacophony of voices rising to a fever pitch. "Stay with us, stay with us," they chanted, each syllable a knife scraping against my sanity. From the corner of my eye, the figure began to rise, its movements jerky and unnatural, as if it were a marionette manipulated by unseen hands. "Come back," it rasped, its voice layered with an echo that made my skin crawl. "You cannot escape." I pressed my back against the wall, desperately searching for a way out. The flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light that danced across the room. In one brief flash, I caught sight of the shadows swirling around the figure, coalescing into a form that resembled a twisted silhouette of myself. It lunged, and I barely sidestepped the attack, my heart racing as I shoved against the door. In that moment of sheer terror, I remembered the stories my grandmother told me about the power of names and banishing spirits. "Know your name," she had said. "Claim it, and they cannot hold you." Summoning every ounce of strength, I shouted, "I am Emily. You have no hold over me." The figure halted, confusion flickering across its features. The whispers faltered, their power wavering under the weight of my assertion. In the next heartbeat, the door burst open, spilling light into the abyss. I bolted toward the exit, the shadows clawing at my heels, their cries morphing into anguished wails. I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath. The oppressive darkness released its grip on me, but not without leaving a mark. I glanced back, half expecting to see the apparition pursuing me. Instead, the basement door swung shut, sealing off whatever darkness lay beyond. Shaking, I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady my racing heart. I knew this wasn't over. I had only scratched the surface of something far more sinister. The house felt alive, pulsing with an unsettling energy that whispered promises of despair and torment. Whatever had awakened within its walls sought me out, and I was not safe. Not yet. The unease that settled over me after the incident in the garden intensified, its weight pressing down on my chest like a leaden shroud. The following morning, I awoke in a cold sweat, tangled in my sheets, as the fragments of last night's nightmare flickered in and out of focus. I had dreamed of whispering voices that crawled beneath my skin, words I couldn't comprehend echoing in my ears. They felt like tendrils, binding their way around my thoughts, squeezing tightly until I gasped for breath. I forced myself out of bed, my limbs heavy with a dread I couldn't shake. Breakfast had become a solitary ritual. I sat in the kitchen, staring out into the untouched garden where the sun struggled to pierce the veil of clouds overhead. The air was thick, pregnant with an impending storm. I could feel it lurking, an entity waiting to be unleashed. As I sat, contemplating the remnants of my shattered sanity, my phone buzzed, rattling against the table. It was a message from Claire, the friend I had confided in about my recent experiences. "Hey, you okay? You seemed off yesterday. Want to talk?" I hesitated before typing a response. I didn't want to burden her with the darkness creeping into my life. Instead, I forced a smile through my words, assuring her I was fine. But I wasn't fine. I could feel it gnawing at me, the lingering sensation of being watched. My thoughts wandered back to the garden. What had I seen? The hollow eyes, the desperate expression. As much as I tried to dismiss it as an overactive imagination, a part of me knew there was something wrong. Something unnatural. The day passed in a blur of restless energy. I found myself pacing the house, an inexhaustible desire to flee battling with an instinct to remain. I could hear the echoes of laughter from the living room, where Sarah, my younger sister, played with her dolls. I watched her for a moment, her innocence a stark contrast to the shadows creeping in around me. I wanted to protect her, to shield her from whatever darkness had latched onto me. As dusk fell, I felt an overwhelming urge to step outside, to confront the remnants of my fear. I slipped on my jacket and walked into the garden, my heart pounding in my chest. The air was thick with a strange stillness, the kind that signaled a storm was brewing. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the distant sound of thunder, reverberating like a warning. I reached the same spot where I had seen the figure, my breath quickening as I stared into the darkness. Dread coiled in my stomach, and I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, as if the earth itself was alive with anticipation. A chill ran down my spine, and I turned my gaze away, convinced it was the shadows playing tricks on me. The garden held secrets I wasn't ready to uncover. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I heard a soft laughter, a lilting sound that echoed through the air, but it wasn't Sarah's. It was foreign, sinister. I spun around, heart racing, searching for the source. The garden felt alive, as if watching me, and I could sense it. Something was waiting, hiding just beyond my line of sight. "Sarah?" I called, my voice trembling. There was no response, only the rustle of leaves. Panic surged through me as I darted toward the house, fear pushing me forward. I burst through the door, my eyes scanning for my sister. "Sarah." My voice echoed through the empty hallways, but the only answer was silence. I dashed through the rooms, calling her name. Frantic, I swung open the door to her room, and relief washed over me as I spotted her playing on the floor. "What are you doing?" I asked, forcing calm into my voice despite my racing heart. She looked up, her eyes wide and innocent. "I'm playing with my new friends." She gestured around the room, her dolls spread out like an audience. But there was something unsettling in her gaze, a deep seriousness that betrayed her childish demeanor. "Friends?" I knelt beside her, the pit of my stomach twisting. "What friends?" "They like to talk to me," she said, her voice soft and sing-song. "They tell me things, secrets." Unease slithered through me, tightening my throat. "What kind of secrets?" She turned to her dolls, her expression changing, becoming distant as if she were channeling someone else. "They say you're not safe. They say you have to let them in." I felt a chill creep up my spine, a cold grip wrapping around my heart. "Sarah, listen to me. You have to." The lights flickered, and for a moment, the room plunged into darkness. My heart thundered in my chest as I grabbed Sarah, pulling her close. When the lights returned, she was staring past me, her expression gone slack, her voice suddenly low and raspy. "They want to play with you too. They want to come home." I pressed my back against the wall, terror lacing through me as I realized the truth. Whatever darkness had followed me had now attached itself to her. The entity was not just a figment of my imagination, it had come from my sister. I needed help. I needed to find someone who could fight it. Panic surged through me again as I remembered the stories I had heard of possession, of exorcism. I had never believed them until now. The air thickened with dread, carrying the whispers of unwelcome voices. "Sarah," I whispered, my voice trembling. "We need to get out of here." But she merely smiled, a smile too wide, too knowing. "They want us to stay." In that moment, I understood. The storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest brewing in my home, a battle that had only just begun. The world around me spun as I grappled with the terrifying reality. I had to fight. I had to save her. The air in the house had thickened since the last time I dared to cross its threshold. Shadows clung to the corners like forgotten secrets, and the wooden floor creaked beneath my feet as though warning me against my return. I stepped inside, heart pounding, recalling the raucous laughter and warmth that once filled these rooms. Now, it felt as if the very walls were breathing, exhaling a frigid chill that whispered my name. I had spent the last few nights poring over the notes I had taken from Dad's old journals. They were filled with stories about dark rituals and the presence that had haunted our family across generations. As I flipped through the pages, I felt the weight of my lineage pressing down on me, a shroud of sorrow and dread. I had hoped to find answers, yet I was left with more questions. The silence in the house was disquieting. I made my way to the living room, where a dim light flickered from the lantern I had left behind. The shadows danced grotesquely against the walls, contorting into shapes that twisted my stomach with unease. Sitting on the worn-out couch, I glanced at the mirror hanging above the fireplace. My reflection stared back, pale and drawn, But it wasn't my own eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. It was the fleeting shadow that appeared behind me. I spun around, but no one stood there. Just the familiar, oppressive stillness. I shook my head, convincing myself it was a trick of the light or perhaps a remnant of the stress that had plagued me since Lisa's strange behavior began. I needed to focus. Focus, I whispered to myself, echoing the mantra I had recited in my head countless times. As the darkness deepened, I turned back to the lantern, its flickering light illuminating the pages of Dad's journal. I had to uncover the truth, to understand the darkness that had taken root in my sister. I read through the entries again, searching for anything that could explain Lisa's condition. My fingers brushed over the words, feeling the urgency in Dad's handwriting. He had spoken of possession. He had described the symptoms, mood swings, uncharacteristic violence, and a chilling gaze that sent shivers down the spine. Each entry felt like a countdown, a warning of the inevitable horror that awaited our family. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the house, startling me from my thoughts. I jumped up, heart racing. "Lisa!" I called out, my voice trembling as I raced towards the kitchen. There, I found her standing, rigid, staring out of the broken window at the moonlit night. The shards of glass lay scattered across the floor, but she seemed oblivious, as if caught in a trance. "Lisa?" I moved closer, feeling the air grow heavier with each step. Her head turned slowly, and when her eyes met mine, I recoiled. They were not the warm, familiar hazel I had known. They had turned a deep, empty black, devoid of life or recognition. "Help me," she whispered, but the voice that emerged was not hers. It was guttural, distorted, sending a jolt of fear through my veins. "You shouldn't have come back." "Lisa, it's me. Please, snap out of it." I reached for her, but she jerked away, a primal growl escaping her lips. "Leave this place," she screeched, her voice echoing strangely, as if more than one being was speaking through her. I felt the bile rise in my throat, my instinct screaming at me to run. But I couldn't leave her. Not like this. Taking a deep breath, I remembered the rituals Dad had described. I fumbled through my pockets, pulling out a small vial filled with salt. It was a protective talisman, one that had been passed down through our family. I had to use it, to cleanse her of whatever had taken hold. "Lisa, I'm going to help you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the chaos swirling around us. "This is going to hurt, but you have to trust me." She let out a shrill laugh that chilled me to the bone, then lunged forward. I barely dodged her grasp, my heart racing. Desperation fueled my movements as I poured the salt in a circle around her, chanting the words I had memorized from Dad's journals. The moment I finished, a violent wind swept through the kitchen, extinguishing the lantern. I felt the temperature drop as shadows thickened around us, swirling with an unnatural energy. I could hear whispers now, a cacophony of voices urging me to stop. "Foolish child," the entity within her hissed, twisting Lisa's body in ways that defied nature. "You cannot free her. She is mine." I swallowed hard, fear coursing through me. "No! I won't let you take her!" I shouted, my voice barely piercing the chorus of dark voices surrounding us. I took a step forward, my resolve strengthening. I had to finish this. With the last of my strength, I raised my voice, louder than the howling wind, reciting the final incantation. The salt began to glow, a blinding light erupting from the circle, illuminating the kitchen. Lisa screamed, a sound of pure agony that clawed at my heart. In that moment, I felt the overwhelming force within her push against the barrier, a palpable rage that shook the very foundations of the house. The ground trembled beneath us, and I braced myself against the kitchen counter, praying I could endure the onslaught. "Leave her. You have no power here." I yelled, pouring every ounce of love I had for my sister into those words. The light burst forth, illuminating every corner of the room, and for a fleeting moment, I could see Lisa's true self, desperate and pleading within the darkness. Then, with a final, blood-curdling scream, the entity exploded outward, a dark mist that enveloped the room before dissipating into nothingness. The light faded, leaving me breathless, staring at the still figure of my sister crumpled on the floor. "Lisa?" I whispered, rushing to her side. She lay there, pale and fragile, but the shadows had retreated. I could see her familiar hazel eyes flicker open, filled with confusion and fear, yet devoid of the malevolent presence that had taken her. "Ryan," she croaked, her voice weak but unmistakably hers. "What happened?" I pulled her close, tears streaming down my face. "You're back. You're safe now." We stayed there, tangled in the remnants of our horror, as the house around us held its breath, the darkness finally receding. But deep within my gut, I knew this battle was only the beginning. The darkness could always return. Story 3, Silent Grove of the Lost. I had always thought of the Haverford Nature Preserve as a sanctuary, a place where the chaos of the world outside faded into the whisper of leaves and the murmurs of the stream. I used to spend my weekends wandering the trails, feeling the weight of civilization lift as I immersed myself in the rich tapestry of greens and browns. The preserved land spanned hundreds of acres, a mosaic of dense forest, open meadows, and the occasional forgotten cabin. But that calm, familiar embrace shattered one Sunday afternoon, shifting my perception of the place forever. I set out later than usual, the sun dipping low in the sky, casting an amber hue over the trees. A gnawing unease had begun to tug at my thoughts when I entered the trailhead, the usual chirping of birds eerily absent. I shook off the feeling, convincing myself that nature needed silence just as much as it needed sound. I trudged along the path, my boots crunching against the gravel, relishing the solitude. Around me, the preserve was alive with a stillness that felt heavy, almost suffocating. With each step, the tall oaks loomed like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching out as if to grab me. The wind rustled through the leaves above, an unsettling whisper that I dismissed as nothing more than the natural language of the forest. It wasn't until I reached the clearing, my usual stopping point, that I sensed something was wrong. The clearing was a small, sunlit spot encircled by trees, a perfect place for reflection. I dropped my backpack onto the ground, but I hesitated before settling down. A chill danced along my spine, and I surveyed the area. The ground was littered with fallen twigs and leaves, but something else caught my eye. There, in the center of the clearing, was a small mound of earth, unusually disturbed, its raw surface exposed as if something had clawed its way out from below. I approached cautiously. The unease in my stomach twisted tighter. My mind raced with possibilities, an animal, perhaps. A burrow disturbed by the recent rain? But the mound was too crude, too jarring in its appearance to be a simple nest. As I crouched down, a faint, acrid smell wafted up, sharp like burnt metal, making my throat dry. I recoiled, the curiosity evaporating into instinctual fear. As I stood, an uneasy silence settled around me, thicker than before. I could hear nothing, no birds, no rustling leaves, not even the distant trickle of water from the stream that usually serenaded my visits. It was as if the very essence of life had been snuffed out. I took a hesitant step back but paused when I heard something, a low, almost imperceptible groaning sound drifting from deeper within the woods. My heart began to race. As the noise grew louder, it morphed into a series of sharp, rhythmic thuds, like a heartbeat echoing through the trees. An instinctive urge to flee took hold of me, yet I felt rooted to the spot, torn between fear and an inexplicable compulsion to uncover the source of the sound. I found myself walking toward it, guided more by curiosity than logic. The trees thickened around me, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers trying to keep me from turning back. The thudding quickened, and I pressed through the underbrush, the sharp twigs scratching against my skin, leaving thin trails of pain in their wake. The ground beneath me began to slope downward. Just ahead, a shadow pulled at the base of an enormous sycamore, its trunk gnarled and ancient. I could barely breathe as I edged closer, the sound morphing now into something akin to a whisper, begging to be heard. I peered around the base of the tree, heart hammering, desperate for answers. What I found was a small, dilapidated shed, half concealed by vines and overgrown ferns. The door hung off its hinges, a dark gap leading into nothingness. The rhythmic thuds pulsed from within, along with muffled cries that stabbed at my chest. It sounded like a person, struggling, pleading. I stepped back, every instinct screaming at me to run. My feet refused to obey. Instead, I took a deep breath and stepped closer to the entryway, my heart racing as I called out, "Hello? Is anyone in there?" Silence engulfed me, and then, from the depths of the shed, something burst forth. A figure stumbled into view, covered in dirt and leaves, eyes wild and sunken. The face twisted into a mask of horror, and for a moment, time ceased. I was frozen, caught between the instinct to comfort and an overpowering urge to flee. It was a man, disheveled and gaunt, his clothes tattered and stained. "No, don't," he gasped, his voice hitching as he fell to his knees before me. "You have to leave." The weight of his words settled over me like a thick fog as I tried to comprehend the reality of the situation. The thudding continued, now more pronounced, reverberating through the ground beneath my feet. The forest had fallen utterly silent, but I could feel the anticipation in the air, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Something was wrong in the preserve, something alive, thrumming with a life of its own. And I was standing at its threshold, teetering on the brink of a dark revelation. I could no longer pretend that this place was the sanctuary I had always known. The woods had changed, and so had I. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that danced between the towering pines, their ancient trunks twisted and gnarled. I had always considered nature a sanctuary, a place of solace away from the frenzied pulse of city life. But as I stood at the threshold of the Whispering Pines Nature Preserve, an unsettling chill crawled along my spine, whispering of secrets buried deep within the forest. The preserve was meant to be a refuge for the weary, a patch of untouched wilderness where one could escape the noise of civilization. I had driven 3 hours from the city, eager to immerse myself in its tranquility, yet the air felt heavy, thick with something unnameable that gnawed at my optimism. A sign at the entrance read, "Welcome to Whispering Pines, enter at your own risk." I frowned, dismissing it as cliché, yet it made my heart race just a bit faster. As I ventured deeper, the sunlight struggled to pierce the thick canopy overhead, leaving the forest floor in muted twilight. The scent of damp earth was overwhelming, mixed with the sweet decay of fallen leaves. Each footstep echoed in the silence, and I felt the weight of solitude press upon me. Out here, I was both safe and alarmingly vulnerable. I reached a fork in the path, one direction leading toward the creek I had planned to explore, the other climbing steeply toward a hill crowned with enormous boulders. The water called to me with a quiet gurgle, a siren song luring me into its embrace. I opted for the creek, hoping to find a secluded spot where I could sit and sketch, capturing the essence of this wild place. The trail was narrow, bordered by dense thickets that rustled softly in the breeze. As I walked, I began to notice strange markings on the trees, deep gouges that resembled claw marks, jagged and uneven. I halted, my breath hitching in my throat. They were too large to be made by any animal I knew of, and the thought sent a wave of unease through me. My instincts urged me to turn back, but curiosity tugged at me like a child pulling on a sleeve. Ignoring the sense of foreboding, I pressed on. Bursting forth from the tangled underbrush, the creek revealed itself like some hidden treasure. Sunlight filtered through the leaves above, sending dappled light dancing across the water's surface. I sank onto a sun-warmed rock, pulling out my sketchbook and pencil, determined to capture the beauty surrounding me. I lost myself in the rhythm of my drawing, each stroke a meditation, but soon the tranquility was shattered. A rustling from the bushes echoed through the air, sharp and disquieting. My pencil froze mid-stroke, and I glanced up, the uneasy feeling creeping back. For a moment, I expected to see a deer, perhaps a curious fox. But nothing emerged. The rustling stopped as abruptly as it began, leaving only the steady flow of the creek and the distant call of birds. I shook my head, chiding myself for being jumpy. The woods were alive, after all. Nature had its quirks, and I was simply unaccustomed to the sounds of the forest. Settling back into my sketching, I attempted to push the noise from my mind, but it lingered like a shadow at the edge of my thoughts. Hours passed, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, the world transformed into a tapestry of darkening colors. The shadows grew longer, the air colder. I checked my watch. It was later than I had intended. I needed to head back before darkness enveloped the preserve entirely. Slipping my sketchbook into my bag, I stood and turned, intending to retrace my steps. Yet as I stepped onto the path, the feeling of being watched washed over me, prickling my skin. I paused, heart racing, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. A lull hum seemed to vibrate through the air, deep and resonating, like a distant growl. I shook my head, unwilling to let panic take hold. Just the wind, I told myself. Just the wind. I began to walk faster, the crunch of leaves beneath my boots echoing loud in the silence. The familiar trail twisted before me, yet with each step, something felt off, as if it were shifting and changing with the fading light. A sense of dread welled up in my chest, urging me to move faster. The forest was no longer a serene escape, but a labyrinth meant to confuse and ensnare. I took a wrong turn, my heart thumping as I realized the path was unfamiliar, creeping deeper into the woods rather than leading me back to safety. Panic clawed at my throat. I turned to retrace my steps, but a sudden rustling erupted from the bushes to my left, sending me into a sprint. Branches whipped at my face, leaves brushed against my skin, and for a brief moment, I was lost in the chaos of sound and motion, all my senses heightened. I could hear my breath, ragged and uneven, blending with the whispers of the trees, as if they were lamenting my intrusion. And then, from out of the corner of my eye, I glimpsed someone, a figure barely discernible between the trees. My heart plummeted. It stood still, just beyond the shadows, watching. It was too dark to make out features, but its presence was palpable, a malevolent force that sent icy fingers of fear down my spine. I stumbled backward, the forest closing in around me. I had to get out. I turned and ran, every instinct screaming to escape. Branches clawed at me, the underbrush snagged at my feet, but I pressed on. The laughter of the woods turned into a cacophony of whispers, each voice a reminder that I was intruding on something that did not want me there. The trail finally opened up, and as I burst into a clearing, I gasped for breath. But the relief was short-lived. There was no sense of safety here. The trees loomed like sentinels, their shadows stretching menacingly across the ground. Above me, the sky darkened, and I was utterly alone, surrounded by an ancient presence that seemed to pulse with life. I had ventured into the Whispering Pines nature preserve seeking peace, but I had unearthed something far more sinister, and now it was too late to turn back. The morning light filtered through the dense canopy above, transforming the woods into a haunting mosaic of shadows and sunbeams. I stepped cautiously along the narrow trail, the damp earth squelching under my boots, each step echoing in a silence that felt thick enough to strangle. The forest loomed around me, an ancient titan whispering secrets I was too terrified to uncover. It had been 3 days since I'd arrived at the nature preserve, the place I had chosen to escape the noise of my life. The isolation had initially felt like a balm, but with each passing hour, the tranquility morphed into something more sinister. My nights were plagued by the rustling of branches and the distant calls of creatures I had never heard before. During the day, The beauty of the terrain seemed to mock me, the vibrant greens and blues contrasting sharply with the unease that coiled tightly in my gut. I recalled last night's events, how a peculiar rustling had drawn me from my restless sleep. It had come from just outside my tent, an unmistakable sound that felt eerily deliberate. I had almost convinced myself it was just a raccoon, but deep down, I knew that there was something more. The air had felt charged, like the moment before a storm, and I had lay paralyzed, staring at the thin fabric of my tent, half expecting it to be torn apart at any moment. I shook off the memory, refusing to give in to fear. Today, I would gather firewood and then set out for the lake, hoping the serene waters might cleanse my mind. The path wound deeper into the woods, each turn leading me farther from civilization and deeper into the embrace of nature. Yet, as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I tried to focus on the songs of the birds, their notes sweet yet tinged with an undercurrent of disquiet. A chill ran down my spine with each rustle of leaves or snap of a twig. I quickened my pace, my breath coming in shallow bursts. The light shifted as clouds rolled in, casting the forest into shadow, and it seemed as if the trees themselves were leaning in, listening. Eventually, I reached a clearing that opened to the lake, its surface smooth and reflective like glass, marred only by the occasional ripple from a darting fish. I dropped the firewood at the water's edge and took a moment to breathe deeply, inhaling the earthy scent of the forest mingled with the crisp tang of water. I knelt at the lake, cupping my hands to scoop the cool liquid into my mouth, my reflection staring back at me, pale and haunted. The tranquility was short-lived. From the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement, a figure slipping through the trees on the opposite bank. My heart raced as I squinted, trying to make sense of the fleeting shadow. It vanished before I could determine its shape, leaving me with a hollow feeling and a pit of dread that swelled in my stomach. I stood abruptly, the water splashing back into the lake as I gripped the edge of the wooden dock for support. Thoughts raced through my mind, each one more irrational than the last. Was it someone else at the preserve? Had I unintentionally stepped into their territory? The isolation of the woods was supposed to feel liberating, yet now it felt like a prison. With racing thoughts, I turned back to gather my firewood, but as I did, a sharp snap echoed through the clearing, a sound loud enough to send a jolt through my chest. I froze, heart pounding. The rustling began again, closer this time, almost rhythmic, as if whatever was out there knew I was watching. I dropped the wood and took a step back, trying to determine the source of the noise when hesitation turned into instinct. I needed to leave. I needed to get back to the safety of my tent, away from whatever was lurking in the shadows. I forced myself to move, but with each step, the sound followed, a relentless pursuit that sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. I navigated the path back to the tent, fighting against the panic that threatened to overwhelm me. My mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. The preserve was isolated, but it wasn't uninhabited. Whoever or whatever was out there had been watching me. The realization settled like a stone in my stomach, heavy and cold. Upon reaching the tent, I fumbled with the zipper, my hands trembling. I slid inside, the familiar confines of my temporary home providing little comfort. I turned to secure the zipper, my heart still hammering. I pressed my back against the fabric, adrenaline making me hyper-aware of my surroundings. Outside, the forest was alive with sounds, the rustle of leaves, the calls of distant birds, and the low creaking of the trees. But beneath those familiar sounds, something else lurked, something that felt alive, aware, and hungry. As the light began to fade into twilight, I realized the shadows were lengthening, creeping closer to the tent's walls. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer alone. The forest, once a sanctuary, had morphed into something monstrous. I could hear it now, a faint whisper on the wind, an invitation or a warning, I couldn't tell which. Panic surged through me as I wondered why I had awakened. It was time to make a decision, stay and face whatever was out there, or flee back to civilization, leaving behind the isolation that had so quickly turned to dread. But could I even find my way back through the darkening woods? The air thickened with tension, and I realized that the preserve had become a labyrinth, one where every path twisted and turned into darkness. I had to confront the truth. I was not merely a visitor here. I was intruding in a place that had its own secrets and its own hunger. Any choice I made now could seal my fate, leading me deeper into the clutches of something that had been waiting, watching, and biding its time. The sun had scarcely risen above the horizon, drenching the landscape in a muted golden hue, when my phone buzzed insistently on the bedside table. I had barely slept, haunted by dreams that twisted my memories into nightmares. Shadows lurked behind every tree, whispering of secrets best left buried. While the calls for help echoed in my mind, the ringing phone was relentless. I finally picked up, squinting against the light. "Is this Claire Morgan?" A voice, chilled and mechanical, pierced through the fog of my sleep. "Yes," I replied, my throat tight. "Who is this?" "You need to come to the nature preserve. Now!" The line went dead before I could respond. Panic surged through me. It was one of the park rangers. I could tell from the tone. They'd been tense ever since the incident, ever since the bodies were found, or rather, the remains. I had learned to keep my distance from the preserve after that, but their urgency gnawed at my insides. I dressed quickly, hardly registering my reflection as I brushed past the bathroom mirror. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat a reminder of the terror that had unfolded just days before. Driving there, the roads twisted under the cover of looming trees, their branches stretching like bony fingers across the asphalt. I pulled into the gravel parking lot, the sound of crunching stones echoing ominously in the silence. The morning air was thick with a tension I couldn't ignore. The other rangers were already gathered, their faces drawn, eyes darting nervously as if expecting something to leap from the underbrush. "Claire," a familiar voice called out. It was Tim, the head ranger. He approached me, his expression grave. "I'm glad you came." "I didn't have much choice," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "What's going on?" Before he could respond, a rustle in the bushes nearby drew my attention. I glanced over, but all I saw was the wind stirring the leaves. It unnerved me. There was something about the way the trees moved, as if they whispered secrets that should remain unspoken. "Everyone is on edge," Tim continued, his voice low. "Our last patrol found something." He hesitated, struggling for words. "We believe there may be a creature in the woods." "A creature?" The word felt wrong on my tongue, misplaced in the context of reality. "You mean an animal?" Noah's gaze flickered to the tree-line. "Something else. We found remains. They were not just animal." The air thickened around us, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I thought of the bodies, the horror of those images, the way the forest had clung to them, shrouding them in darkness. I had hoped it was an isolated incident, a freak occurrence. My hands trembled as I caught myself remembering the blood-stained earth and the eerie silence that followed. "Come on," he urged, breaking my reverie. "We need your help. We need someone to document what we find, someone who can keep calm under pressure." "I can't," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I can't do this again. Please, Claire." His eyes bore into mine, pleading. "You're the only one who understands the stories, the local myths. If there's something out there, we need to know." I steeled myself, recalling the countless accounts I had read over the years. Forest spirits, vengeful specters, monsters that thrived in the shadows. I had dismissed them, but now, in the trembling daylight, they clawed back into my mind. I nodded, albeit reluctantly, the decision made. I would face it, whatever it was. As we entered the woods, The light dimmed, swallowed by the canopy overhead. The ground squelched beneath my boots, a reminder that the forest was alive and aware of our presence. I walked behind Tim and the team, their muted conversations echoing in my ears, but I felt disjointed, as if I were floating outside my body. The anticipation felt electric, the kind that prickled at the base of my spine. "Over here," Tim called, gesturing toward a clearing. Sunlight broke through the trees like a spotlight, revealing a grotesque scene that sent my stomach lurching. In the center lay an animal's carcass, but it had been torn apart as if by something far larger and more powerful. The smell hit me next, a metallic odor that clung to the back of my throat. "What did this?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. "We don't know." Tim stepped closer, examining the remains. "But something has been preying on the wildlife. This isn't just about the bodies we found before. It's getting bolder." As I moved closer to the clearing, I caught sight of something glistening near the edge of the remains. A small, weathered charm, half buried in the mud. I knelt down, brushing the dirt away. It was a talisman, intricately carved with symbols I recognized from the local folklore. My heart raced as I realized its significance. "Claire?" Tim's voice pulled me back from the precipice of thoughts that threatened to spiral. "What do you think?" "This was left here intentionally," I murmured, holding it up for him to see. "It's supposed to ward off evil. But it seems it didn't work." Suddenly, a low growl reverberated through the trees, freezing the air around us. The rangers fell silent, their eyes wide with fear. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to flee, yet something held me rooted in place. I turned slowly, scanning the dense underbrush, searching for the source of the sound. "Everyone, stay close," Tim murmured, but his voice was shaky. "We need to move." Before we could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows, tall and imposing, with eyes that gleamed like shards of ice. My breath caught in my throat, the charm slipping from my fingers and sinking into the earth. The creature stood there, a grotesque hybrid of human and beast, its body covered in fur and matted with grime. An unnatural stillness enveloped us. "Run!" Tim shouted, snapping us from our stupor. We didn't need a second invitation. My heart thundered in my chest as we scrambled back toward the safety of the parking lot, the forest closing in around us like a predator drawing in for the kill. But as I broke through the tree line, glancing back one last time, I felt the weight of the creature's gaze upon me, a promise that this was far from over. What was once a sanctuary was now a hunting ground, and I had walked right into its jaws. The preserve had changed forever, and I was ensnared in its web, the horror just beginning to unfurl. I had always thought of the woods as a sanctuary, a place where I could escape the chaos of the world. But now, as I stood at the edge of the nature preserve, its once serene beauty felt suffocating and oppressive. The gnarled trees loomed over me like silent sentinels, their twisted branches curled like fingers reaching out from the shadows. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving only a faint glow that struggled to penetrate the thick canopy above. My heart raced as I recalled the whispers I had heard in the dark, the sounds that skittered just out of sight, and the sudden chill that crawled up my spine like 1,000 icy fingers. I had decided to return to the preserve, to confront whatever had lurked beneath its tranquil facade. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that the woods held secrets, ancient and sinister, waiting for someone foolish enough to pry them open. As I stepped deeper into the underbrush, the foliage crackled beneath my feet, a sound stark in the oppressive quiet. I remembered the local legends I had dismissed as mere stories, tales of people who had vanished into the woods, drawn by a force they could neither understand nor resist. Despite my skepticism, I felt an unsettling pull, a force that tugged at my mind, urging me to go further. I reached a clearing where the ground dipped into a shallow bowl, thick with damp earth and overgrown with weeds that swayed gently in an unfelt breeze. In the center stood a massive oak tree, its trunk gnarled and twisted as if it had been shaped by some malignant hand. I approached it cautiously, captivated by its presence, when I noticed something strange woven among its roots, something that did not belong. It was a collection of objects, broken glass, scraps of fabric, and what looked like a rusted locket. My pulse quickened as I picked up the locket, feeling a strange warmth radiate from it, despite its cold exterior. As I opened it, the photograph inside revealed a woman with hauntingly beautiful eyes. A shiver coursed through me. There was something about her that felt familiar, yet disturbingly distant. I dropped the locket, startled, and it fell into the roots of the oak, disappearing into the shadows. The moment it left my hand, I heard a soft rustling, as if the woods themselves were coming alive. I turned, half expecting to see something emerge from the trees, but the clearing remained obstinately empty. My breath came in shallow gasps, the air thick with a sense of dread. Pushing my panic aside, I scanned the perimeter of the clearing. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement in the trees to my left. My heart pounded as I squinted, trying to make out what was hidden in the gloom. But as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished, leaving behind only the echo of my own breath. A memory from earlier that day flashed through my mind. The local ranger I had spoken with had warned me about entering the preserve at night. He had shared the tales of those lost, urging me to heed the signs of danger. I had scoffed at his warnings, but now, standing in the darkness, I felt foolish and naive. The woods were not just trees and animals. They were something far more primal and instinctual, a realm that didn't welcome intruders. With a deep, steadying breath, I turned to leave the clearing, my instinct screaming at me to escape. But as I took my first step, a vague sound reached my ears, a faint whisper that twined through the branches, curling around my thoughts. I froze, straining to hear. It was indistinct, a murmur that felt as if it were pulling me closer rather than pushing me away. "Come," it beckoned softly, the word drifting on the cold night air. "Closer." I shook my head, as if fighting a trance, my body yearning to follow the sound despite the surge of fear. But then, beneath the whispers, I heard another sound, an unmistakable crunch of leaves. I was not alone. The realization struck me like a blow, and I spun around, my pulse pounding in my ears. In the distance, between the trees, I caught a glimpse of movement, a silhouette, tall and unnaturally still. My breath hitched in my throat as I tried to discern its features, but the darkness concealed everything. It stood unnaturally rigid, watching, waiting. My gut twisted with primal fear. Every instinct urged me to flee. Instead, I walked backward, maintaining my gaze on the figure, praying I wouldn't trip over roots or debris. The whispers intensified, a chorus of sound that swelled with my growing panic. "Come closer," they murmured almost in unison, the voice echoing all around me. Suddenly, the figure shifted, taking a step into the dim light. My heart dropped as I saw the outline clearly, a face emerging from the shadows, pale and disturbingly familiar. It was the woman from the locket, her eyes hollow and void of life. I stumbled back, my breath hitching in a strangled gasp. "Help me," she whispered, her voice like the crackling of dry leaves, and in that moment, I knew I wasn't merely trapped in a forest of trees. I was ensnared in a web of despair, wrapped tightly by the secrets that lay buried beneath the roots. Every ounce of terror surged through me, and I turned to run, the whispers rising in a cacophony of cries. I raced through the trees, branches clawing at my skin, a reminder of the darkness lurking just beyond my sight. I could feel her presence trailing behind me, a specter moving through the shadows. The preserve had never been a sanctuary, it was a prison, and now I was part of its haunting legacy. Story 4, left to wither in the dark woods. The forest loomed like an ancient giant, its gnarled roots stretching out like skeletal fingers, grasping at the earth while the canopy choked the sunlight into mere slivers that dappled the ground below. I had been lost for hours, or maybe days. Time bled into itself in this disorienting labyrinth of shadows and whispers. I could still hear the echoes of laughter from the campfire, the screech of my friend's voice mingling with the crackling flames, taunting me with memories of warmth and safety, now just phantoms dancing in the dark corners of my mind. It all began as a simple weekend getaway, a chance to escape the monotony of city life and reconnect with friends in nature. We had set off with high spirits, our backpacks heavy with supplies and our hearts light with anticipation. But after a few days of hiking and exploring, things had taken a turn that none of us had anticipated. I remembered the moment clearly, like a photograph burned into my memory. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting elongated shadows that twisted and writhed at our feet. We had decided to split up for a while, eager to discover the hidden trails and secret spots we had heard about from locals. I was supposed to meet Jenna beneath a large oak tree. She had promised to return after a quick smoke. But when I found the tree, it was only me and the whispering wind. I called for her, my voice rising into the stillness of the woods, but the silence that followed was more profound than I could have imagined. The trees, their thin trunks swaying gently, seemed to lean in toward me, as if eavesdropping on my growing panic. I scanned the surroundings, the claustrophobic shadows tightening around me, and settled on the path I had ventured down earlier. Maybe I had taken a wrong turn. Maybe Jenna was just a little lost too. But when I retraced my steps, the path seemed to shift underfoot, morphing into something unrecognizable. The trees had closed in, their branches reaching out like gnarled hands, and the underbrush thickened, tangling my legs and pulling me back with an insistent grip. After what felt like an eternity of wandering, I finally stopped, my breath coming in shallow gasps, and decided to call out to the others. Help! Jenna! Anyone! My voice fractured as it dissipated into the damp air, swallowed by the woods. Moments stretched into hours as I stood in silence, the only response a haunting rustle of leaves. My heart raced, and for the first time, I became acutely aware of how alone I truly was. As night descended, the forest transformed. The sounds of nature that had once comforted me became sinister, as if the creatures of the night were conspiring in hushed tones. I stumbled upon a clearing illuminated only by the slivers of moonlight breaking through the canopy. My pulse quickened when I noticed an old, dilapidated cabin at the edge of the clearing. It was barely standing, covered in creeping vines and age-old decay, a relic that seemed to belong to another time. I approached it cautiously, every instinct screaming for me to turn back, but curiosity overruled my better judgment. The door swung open with a reluctant creak, revealing a dark interior filled with a musty odor that clawed at my throat. Shadows danced across the walls as I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight. I flicked on my phone's flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness, revealing remnants of a life once lived, rusted tools scattered about, a broken chair propped against a wall, and faded photographs that seemed to glare at me with sunken eyes. Jenna? I called again, but the cabin answered with silence, thick and suffocating. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine, a sensation as if the very walls were watching me. The air felt electric, and I could almost taste the tension, a bitter tang on my tongue. Something shifted in the corner of the room, a shadow darker than the rest, and I turned sharply, my heart pounding. My breath quickened as I adjusted the flashlight, the beam catching the edge of a figure. It was a child, a little girl, with tangled dark hair and eyes that glimmered like obsidian. She stood unnaturally still, her small hands clasped in front of her. Where is she? I stumbled back, my voice barely a whisper. Terror gripped my chest, the kind that rooted me to the spot, paralyzing my limbs. Where's Jenna? The girl didn't answer, but instead pointed toward the back of the cabin. I hesitated, a primal instinct screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But the thought of Jenna, lost and alone, drew me deeper into the chilling gloom. As I approached the darkness she had indicated, I noticed a trapdoor in the floor, its edges worn and splintered. The air grew colder, and a foul odor wafted up from the crack, making me gag. I glanced back at the girl, who remained silent, her gaze unwavering, almost expectant. "Jenna?" I tried again, my voice trembling as I crouched by the door. The hinges squeaked as I pried it open, revealing a set of stairs spiraling down into the shadows. The thought of what lay beneath sent a wave of nausea through me, but I couldn't abandon her. "Jenna!" I called, and this time I heard something in reply, a faint whimper, an echo of sobs that pulled at the tendrils of hope still clinging to my mind. I descended into the darkness, each step heavier than the last, the air thick with the promise of something unimaginable lurking below. I had no idea that the true horror awaited me in the depths of that cabin, something beyond nightmares, hidden in the very heart of the woods where the light dared not seep. The sun hung low in the sky, casting twisted shadows that danced between the trees as I stumbled over roots, each step echoing with an unsettling crunch. The air was thick with an earthy scent, damp and decaying, the smell of life mingling ominously with the essence of death. I could feel the weight of the forest pressing in around me, its silence a suffocating shroud. I had no idea how long I had been lost, the minutes stretching into an eternity, but the realization that I might never find my way out twisted my stomach into knots. My mind raced back to the moment I and my friends had set off on what was supposed to be a thrilling adventure, a camping trip designed to break the monotony of our lives. We had laughed, joked, and bickered, a cacophony of youthful exuberance, blissfully unaware of the lurking dangers. But the thrill had turned into dread when darkness fell, and the forest transformed. The trees, once tall and inviting, morphed into gnarled sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky, devoid of life and warmth. It began with a sickening pop, a sound that cut through our laughter like a knife. I turned, the firelight flickering against the backdrop of thickening shadows, and saw Sarah's face, pale and frozen in fear. The light had flickered, dimmed, and then extinguished altogether, leaving us enveloped in a shroud of darkness. We had fumbled for our flashlights, our voices rising in panic as we realized the batteries had all mysteriously died. "Just the cold," Jacob had said, though even he sounded uncertain. I could see the fear creeping into his eyes, matching the dread that pulled in my stomach. We had huddled close, exchanging whispered suggestions about how to handle the situation. There was no cell reception, no possibility of calling for help. Our laughter faded to awkward silence, punctuated only by the rustling of leaves and the distant howl of the wind. I remember insisting we stay put, that the forest was too vast and dark to wander aimlessly. Jacob had suggested venturing out, claiming he knew a nearby ranger station. His bravado seemed to falter when he saw the look on my face, our twisted predicament settling in. Eventually, we concluded we should attempt to wait until dawn, convinced that our friends would return soon, that this was merely a temporary setback. The hours dragged on, each minute amplifying the gnawing anxiety in my chest. While we clung to the dying embers of the fire, the forest took on an unsettling life of its own. Shadows shifted and swayed, leaving us with a sense of being watched, scrutinized by unseen eyes. When morning came, it bore no relief. The white mist hung low, a murky veil that twisted the trees into grotesque shapes. My heart pounded in my chest as we called out for our friends, the timbre of our voices swallowed by the damp air. The silence stretched back, mocking us. That was when I noticed the footprints, deep impressions in the soft earth, leading away from our camp. They were large, too large to belong to any of my friends. Panic surged through me. Was there someone else out here? I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. The sun barely broke through the heavy canopy, the muted light giving way to an eerie atmosphere, and the shadows seemed to elongate, stretching toward me with intent. "Guys, look at this," I said, my voice trembling. Jacob leaned closer to the ground, his brow furrowing as he examined the trail. We followed the tracks, a sensation of dread coiling tight around our minds. Every snap of a twig sent us into a frenzy, eyes darting to the surrounding trees. The forest was alive, but it felt hostile, a hidden predator waiting to pounce. Minutes turned into hours as we navigated the dense thicket, calling out names, searching desperately for any sign of our friends. I thought I saw something flicker at the corner of my eye, a figure darting between the trees. My breath quickened, the primal instinct to flee surging to the forefront of my mind. "Did you see that?" I gasped, my heart racing. Jacob nodded, his face pale as he gestured for us to keep moving. "We need to get out of here." But the deeper we ventured, the more disoriented I became. The landscape twisted in on itself, and the trees grew denser, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers. I stumbled on, alone in my thoughts, plagued by the nagging fear of what lurked behind us. The shadows felt thicker, more pronounced, as though they were swallowing anything that dared to stray too far from the light. Night fell again abruptly, the forest enveloped in darkness. I could feel it closing in, the air thick with dread. We gathered what little energy we had left and sought shelter under the gnarled branches of an ancient tree. The three of us huddled close, whispering fears of what might have happened to our friends, the shadows around us whispering back. As the moon hummed high and full, I was jolted from a fitful sleep by the sound of rustling. My heart pounded in my chest as I froze, the darkness pressing in around us. I dared not breathe, waiting for whatever lurked to reveal itself. Then I saw it, a shape slinking through the trees, dark and sinuous, with eyes like burning coals. It didn't stay in one place, it prowled, circling us, a predatory dance that sent shivers down my spine. In that moment, I understood the horror of our situation. We were not just lost in the woods, we were hunted. The chill of the night air seeped through my jacket, and I shivered, trying to wrap myself tighter within its fabric. I had always thought of the woods as peaceful, a place where I could find solace among the whispering pines. But now, the silence felt oppressive, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath in anticipation of something dark and sinister. I had stumbled upon the clearing just east of where I had left the others, hoping to find some semblance of direction or, at the very least, a way to defend myself. The moon hung low, casting a silver hue over the ground that seemed both alluring and foreboding. Shadows danced among the trunks like phantoms, and I felt a growing sense of unease as I stood there alone. I had heard the stories about these woods, local legends whispered in hushed tones around campfires. They spoke of disappearances, of people who ventured too deep and never returned. At first, I had dismissed them as mere folklore, but now, I felt the weight of each tale bearing down on me. A soft rustle among the underbrush yanked me from my thoughts. My heart raced as I turned in the direction of the sound, desperately scanning the darkened tree line. "Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice wavering. Silence answered me, thick and suffocating. I cursed myself for leaving my friends behind, for thinking I could find help on my own. It had been a stupid decision, one that felt increasingly like a betrayal of my own instincts. As I turned to retrace my steps, I felt a prickling at the back of my neck, a sensation that something was watching me. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. It was silly, I reminded myself, just my imagination running wild. But the sensation persisted, an insistent weight that pressed down on my shoulders. I took a step forward, then another, each footfall cushioned by the damp earth. The path I had taken earlier now seemed foreign, each turn obscured by the shadows. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the night sky. I stepped deeper into the woods, each step echoing my growing trepidation. Was I even headed in the right direction? I had left a trail of faint impressions in the loamy soil, but doubt crept in like a fog. The dull thud of my heartbeat was the only sound as I moved. Just as I had settled into a rhythm, a snapping twig broke the silence behind me. I stopped abruptly, adrenaline spiking through me. "Hello?" I tried again, forcing steadiness into my voice. No answer. My instinct screamed for me to run, but the paralyzing force of fear held me in place. I turned slowly, scanning the darkness, trying to pierce it with my gaze. Then, there was a flicker of movement just beyond the trees. My breath caught in my throat as I squinted, straining to see. A figure lurked at the edge of the clearing, obscured by the shadows. I couldn't make out any features, but the outline was unmistakably human, and it stood completely still, watching me. "Who are you?" My voice was a strained whisper, laced with panic. The figure didn't move. It was a statue shrouded in darkness, and the longer I looked, the more aware I became of the silence surrounding us. I felt as though the entire forest held its breath, waiting for something to shatter the tension. "Please, I need help," I stuttered, desperation clawing at my throat. "I got lost." Still nothing. My primal instinct screamed to flee, but my feet felt glued to the ground. There was something about the figure that held me captive, a magnetic pull that forced me to confront it. As I took a cautious step forward, the figure finally moved, shifting slightly as if considering me. In that moment, I caught a glimpse of its face, pale and gaunt, eyes sunken deep into their sockets. Fear wrapped around my chest like a vice, and I turned to run, stumbling back the way I had come. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else, the thud almost deafening. Branches snagged at my clothes as I barreled through the underbrush, panic driving me forward. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The sensation of being pursued gnawed at me, a relentless predator closing in. I had to find my friends. I had to escape. But the woods twisted around me, each tree a sentinel standing watch over my despair. I felt disoriented, the ground uneven beneath my feet as I navigated the thickening darkness. I crisscrossed my path, desperately hoping to stumble across a familiar landmark. It was then that I realized I had lost all sense of direction, the landscape morphing into an unrecognizable maze of shadows. That's when I heard it. The sound of footsteps echoing in the distance, soft yet distinct, like a heartbeat thrumming through the trees. They mimicked my own pace, teasing me, coaxing me to stop, to turn and face whatever shadow lay behind. "Help!" I screamed, the word tearing from my throat. "Anyone!" The footsteps quickened, and so did my pulse. I shot forward, adrenaline coursing through my veins as a renewed sense of urgency propelled me deeper into the woods. I stumbled and fell, my palms scraping against the ground as I fought to regain my footing. I pushed myself back up and sprinted forward, embracing the darkness that surrounded me, hoping against hope that salvation lay just ahead. But with every step, the feeling grew stronger, the sensation that something, or someone, was hunting me. I needed to wake from this nightmare, to escape this hell, but the woods closed in around me, their embrace both suffocating and merciless. As the moon hid behind a cloud, plunging the scene into darkness, all I could hear was the burgeoning sound of footsteps drawing closer, echoing my every move. The air was thick with silence, each rustle of leaves sounding like a whispered secret, each snap of a twig underfoot a sharp reminder of my solitude. I had lost track of time since I last saw my friends, the sun dipping lower in the sky, casting elongated shadows through the canopy above me. The woods had transformed from a lively playground into a maze of menacing silhouettes. Anxiety clawed at my insides as I navigated the overgrown terrain, straining to hear any sign of life. "Guys!" I called out, my voice echoing into the emptiness around me. There was no reply, just the sound of my own heartbeat thrumming loudly in my ears. We had come here for adventure, for the thrill of the unknown, but now it felt as though the woods had conspired against me, swallowing my friends one by one. It had been hours since the laughter and banter, since the gleeful shouts had faded into the depths of these ancient trees. After Michael had suggested we split up to explore the area by the old cabin, I hesitated, but their enthusiasm had swept me along. Now, I regretted my decision. I pressed my palms against the bark of a gnarled tree, trying to ground myself. It felt alive, pulsating with some hidden energy I couldn't comprehend. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and panicked, as I stepped deeper into the heart of the woods. I remembered the cabin from the stories. The locals had whispered about it in hushed tones, saying it was cursed, abandoned long ago after a family had vanished without a trace. The tales had been the allure that drew us here, but now those stories turned to dread as I approached the clearing. The cabin stood there, decaying and forlorn, its windows like hollow eyes staring back at me. The door creaked open, almost an invitation, though I felt a primal instinct urging me to turn and run. But curiosity pulled me closer, and I stepped inside, my heart racing with every inch I crossed. The air inside was stale, filled with the scent of mold and damp wood. I could see remnants of a life once lived: a shattered chair, a collapsed table, and a scattering of old newspaper clippings that littered the floor, yellowed and brittle. I knelt to examine one, my fingers trembling as I turned it over. The headline read, "Family Missing in Woods, Search Efforts Fail." The article detailed how a couple and their 2 children had vanished years ago, leaving behind only questions. I shivered as I scanned the names, suddenly feeling the weight of history pressing down on me. The stories had been mere tales, but now they felt all too real. It was then that I heard it, a soft sound, like a whisper carried on the wind. I froze, straining to make sense of it. Was it just my imagination? I took a cautious step back and called out again, "Guys? Is anyone there?" No answer came, but the whisper persisted, now more distinct, a murmur that seemed to beckon me deeper into the cabin. I turned to leave, but a sudden crash from the adjacent room made me jump. My heart raced as I instinctively backed away, but curiosity anchored me in place. Slowly, I moved toward the source, peering around the doorframe. The sight that greeted me was chilling. The remnants of an old children's bedroom lay scattered, walls adorned with peeling wallpaper depicting fairy tale scenes now faded and grotesque. A small teddy bear sat in the corner, dirt encrusted but eerily intact. My breath caught in my throat as I saw something else beneath the bed, a foot, pale and lifeless. Panic surged through me as I stumbled back, the reality of the moment crashing down like a heavy wave. I turned to bolt back the way I came, but the door slammed shut with a deafening thud, trapping me inside. "Let me out!" I screamed, pounding my fists against the wood. The cabin felt alive, its very essence constricting around me. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and dread pulled in my stomach. I braced myself against the door, feeling the wood vibrate as something scratched against the other side. I wasn't alone. With a surge of adrenaline, I turned and rushed toward the window, throwing my body against it. It rattled but didn't budge. The whispers morphed into laughter, chilling and mocking, echoing in the confined space. I was engulfed in darkness, my pulse quickening with each second as I searched for an escape. I yanked open drawers, rifled through the remnants of a life left behind, all the while the whispers taunted me with their melodic cadence. My fingers grazed something cold and metallic. A rusty knife, its blade dull but still sharp enough to cut, the first weapon I had found. I gripped it tightly as the laughter intensified. It felt as if the very walls of the cabin were closing in on me, the dark corners of the room breathing, watching. I needed to get out. The whispers shifted, sounding more like words now, forming phrases that sent a chill down my spine. "Stay with us," they pleaded, a haunting echo of the guilty past. I recoiled, heart racing, and screamed into the void, "Leave me alone." And then, as abruptly as it began, the laughter stopped. The air turned heavy, suffocating, making it hard to breathe. I stumbled back, glancing around wildly, and then I saw it, a figure emerging from the shadows, pale and thin, its eyes hollow and dark. It reached out, fingers elongated and reaching for me. I darted for the door, adrenaline fueling my escape, but as I reached for the handle, it felt icy cold, as if the very essence of fear was gripping it tightly. The figure closed in, its mouth a twisted smile, and just as I thought I would be lost within its grasp, I summoned the strength to pull the door open. Light spilled into the cabin, flooding my vision. I lunged outside, gasping for air, but the whispers followed me, echoing in the trees. I didn't stop running until I broke free of the clearing, the cabin disappearing behind me, but the haunting laughter continued to reverberate in my mind. I was free, but I knew now the woods held secrets darker than I could fathom. And I had only scratched the surface of what lay hidden within their depths. I awoke with a start, my heart pounding against my ribcage, as if trying to escape the claustrophobic confines of my body. The woods around me had transformed overnight, cloaked in a thick mist that seeped through the trees, wrapping everything in a shroud of eerie silence. I rubbed my eyes, recalling the events that led me here, the abandonment, the terror, and the strange whispers that had haunted my sleep. The sun was a dim glow behind the curtain of fog, casting a sickly light that barely penetrated the canopy. I took a deep breath, tasting the damp earth and decaying leaves, the smell as thick as my dread. I was alone, that much I knew, and the prospect of moving through this distorted reality filled me with trepidation. The memories of the last few days tugged insistently at my mind, the arguments, the final push that had left me stranded in the woods, and the chilling sense of being watched. I forced myself to sit up, brushing debris from my clothes. The air was colder now, a biting chill that sank into my bones. My stomach growled, and hunger gnawed at me. I needed to find food, but the thought of venturing into the woods felt like stepping into a mouth that might close around me at any moment. The trees loomed like sentinels, their twisted branches reaching out, beckoning or warning, perhaps both. Gripping the rough bark of a nearby tree, I pulled myself to my feet. The forest was alive with sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, and something else, something deeper, a low rumble that felt like the growl of a predator lurking just beyond my sight. I took a cautious step forward, my senses heightened. Navigating through the dense underbrush was a challenge, and every snap of a twig beneath my feet sent jolts of panic through me. I needed to find a way out, but every direction looked the same, an endless stretch of trees, their gnarled roots snaking across the ground like the fingers of the dead. I was trapped in a labyrinth of my own making, the echoes of my previous panic now replaced by a growing sense of determination to survive. As I moved deeper, I stumbled upon a small clearing. The mist hung heavy, but a faint shimmer caught my eye. I moved toward it, curiosity piqued. It was a small pond, the water still and black, reflecting the twisted shapes of the trees like a distorted mirror. I leaned closer, peering into its depths, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw something move beneath the surface. A fleeting shadow, perhaps a trick of the light. I turned away, unnerved, the weight of the woods pressing down on me. I had to keep moving. The whispers returned, just at the edge of my hearing, a soft susurration that felt almost familiar. I shook my head, willing myself to focus. They were just the wind, the rustle of the branches. Nothing more. I pressed on, determined to forge a path, but the calls grew louder, more insistent, forming words I couldn't quite grasp. As I walked, the forest shifted subtly around me, the trees seeming to lean in closer, the mist swirling with intent. I recalled the stories my grandmother used to tell, of spirits that wandered the woods, looking for lost souls to accompany them. I brushed the thought aside. My rational mind fought against the creeping fear, desperately trying to convince me that my imagination was responsible for the sensations around me. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the clearing. I froze, my heart racing as I turned to face the source. A figure emerged from the trees, shrouded in mist. At first, I couldn't make out any details. My breath hitched in my throat as I instinctively stepped back, feeling the damp earth beneath my feet. The figure was an outline at first, emerging slowly, and then it became clearer. It was a man, his clothes tattered, with wild hair and an expression that was both desperate and haunting. "Help, please," he rasped, his voice barely rising above a whisper. I hesitated, torn between fear and pity. He looked as lost as I felt, but something about him sent a chill racing through my spine. The intensity of his gaze, the shadows beneath his eyes, hinted at something darker. "What happened to you?" I managed to croak, my voice trembling. He took a step closer, and I could see the dirt caked on his skin, the haunted look in his eyes growing more frantic. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe. They're watching." "Who?" I asked, glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see dark figures lurking just out of sight. "The ones that take you. The ones that come at night." His words fell like stones into the stillness, and I felt my stomach knot. The night. I remembered the whispers, the feeling of being watched as I lay in the dark, unable to sleep. "What do you mean?" I pressed, my voice quaking. "They come for the lost," he said, his voice growing more urgent. "They'll take you if you stay." Panic surged through me, and I took a step back. "I need to get out of here." "Then run," he urged, his eyes wide. "Run before it's too late." Before I could respond, he turned and bolted into the trees, disappearing into the mist. I stood frozen for a moment, confusion and fear warring within me. I couldn't stay here, not now. Not after what he had said. I turned on my heel and sprinted in the opposite direction, the chilling sensation of being watched prickling at my skin. Each breath came in harsh gasps, the forest closing in around me, the feeling of dread gnawing at my heels. I pushed forward, branches snagging at my clothes, the whispers growing louder, almost tangible now, wrapping around me like a noose. I had to escape. But with every frantic step I took, I felt the darkness clawing at the edges of my mind, reminding me that the woods weren't just a prison, they were alive, hungry, and waiting for me to succumb to their embrace. Story 5, Campfire Secrets Beneath the Blood Moon. The woods had always called to me, yet as I stood at the edge of the sprawling forest, a shiver trickled down my spine. It wasn't the chill of the evening air, it was a prickling sensation, a warning tugging at the back of my mind. My friends, Mia and Jake, were already unloading the gear from the car, their laughter echoing through the trees. They had insisted we escape the chaos of our lives in the city for a weekend of camping, a chance to reconnect with nature. But as I stepped into the thicket, the shadows seemed to shift, and I felt an inexplicable dread. We had chosen a remote site, a place far from the trails and the noise of civilization. The campsite was nestled in a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines that whispered secrets in the wind. I had always loved the smell of pine needles and damp earth, the way the world felt alive under the canopy of stars. But this time, the beauty of the woods felt tainted, as if a dark presence lurked just beyond my line of sight. Mia and Jake set up the tent while I gathered firewood, my hands trembling slightly as I bent to pick up a sturdy branch. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone watching me, but the woods were empty. I returned to the clearing, forcing a smile as I added the wood to the small pile they had created. Jake pulled out the lighter, his face illuminated by the flickering flames as he ignited the kindling. As night fell, the forest transformed. The sounds of wildlife faded into an oppressive silence, broken only by the crackling fire. Mia began to tell ghost stories, her voice low and hypnotic, as the flickering shadows danced around us. I tried to join in, adding my own tales of terror from the city urban legends that made us laugh. But all the while, I felt something gnawing at me, a sense of wrongness that I couldn't shake. "Come on, Amanda, you can't be scared now," Jake said, tossing a twig into the fire. "This is supposed to be fun." "Yeah, lighten up." Mia chimed in, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I forced a laugh, but inside, I could feel the tension coiling tighter. I shot a glance toward the trees, my instinct screaming at me to be alert. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist as the firelight flickered, and I couldn't help but imagine something lurking just beyond our sight. "Let's go for a walk," Jake suggested after a while, breaking the eerie quiet that had settled around us. "We can explore a bit before we go to bed." Mia jumped up enthusiastically, but I hesitated. "Isn't it a bit late for that? We should probably stay close to the fire." "Oh, come on. It'll be fun." "A little adventure," Jake insisted, flashing me a charming grin that was hard to resist. With a sigh, I stood up. "Fine. But let's not wander too far." As we walked deeper into the forest, the tight-knit camaraderie we had felt by the fire began to fade. The trees closed in around us, their gnarled roots jutting out like skeletal fingers. I quickened my pace to keep up with Mia and Jake, who were laughing and teasing each other about who would be the first to spot a ghost. My laughter felt strained, each peal echoing back to me from the darkness. We wandered off the beaten path, the sound of our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of leaves. The light from our phones cut through the dark, creating small pockets of illumination that felt feeble against the void surrounding us. Every crack of a twig made my heart race, and every rustle in the underbrush turned my stomach into knots. "What's wrong?" Mia asked, glancing back at me. "I don't know. It feels creepy out here," I admitted, wishing I hadn't. Jake rolled his eyes. "You're just being paranoid. This is nature. It's not going to hurt you." "Yeah, but nature has things," I countered. "Things we don't understand." Suddenly, the air grew cold, a sharp contrast to the warmth we had felt by the fire. I felt a prickle at the back of my neck, as if someone were watching us. I turned, half expecting to see a figure lurking between the trees, but the shadows held only silence. "Let's head back," I suggested, my voice strained. But before they could respond, a low growl echoed through the dark, primal and menacing. It reverberated in my bones, sending a jolt of fear coursing through my body. Mia and Jake froze, their previous bravado evaporating in an instant. "What was that?" Mia whispered, eyes wide. "I don't know," Jake replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it was just a bear or something?" "I don't think bears growl like that," I said, my heart racing. My instinct screamed at me to run, to get back to the safety of the fire. Without thinking, I turned and started to sprint back the way we had come, the sound of my pulse drowning out everything else. Panic gripped me, and I didn't look back. I could hear the rustling behind me, footsteps following close. It felt like a predator was stalking its prey. "Wait!" I heard Jake shout, but I didn't stop. I could feel the darkness closing in, the trees twisting into grotesque shapes that reached for me like hands. I didn't know what awaited us in the depths of the forest, but I was certain I didn't want to find out. I burst into the clearing, gasping for breath and nearly tripping over the log we had used for seating. The fire crackled, casting eerie shadows as I spun around, half expecting to see my friends emerging from the darkness. But they didn't. The silence was deafening, and the shadows of the trees seemed to close in around me, swallowing the light. "Jake? Mia?" I called, my voice trembling. There was no answer, only the sound of the wind whispering through the pines. As dread settled over me, I realized I was utterly alone. The night air pressed in around us, heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. As the fire sputtered and crackled, casting erratic shadows among the trees, I could feel an unsettling tension building. The sounds of the forest had shifted, the chirping of crickets had faded, replaced by an unnerving silence that swallowed our laughter whole. Matt and Jenna sat on either side of the fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. Matt poked the fire with a stick, sending embers dancing into the crisp darkness. Jenna, her eyes wide, recounted a story she had heard about a couple who had vanished in these very woods. I had dismissed her earlier tales about ghosts and the supernatural, but now her voice quivered with a hint of uncertainty. "They say if you hear the laughter of children, it's already too late," she said, her voice a whisper. "They lure you in, and then—" "Enough with the ghost stories, Jen," Matt interrupted, rolling his eyes. "You're just trying to scare us. There's no such thing as ghosts." I chuckled nervously, though deep down, I felt a creeping dread. The atmosphere had thickened, and for the first time, I glanced beyond the firelight, staring into the impenetrable blackness of the trees. The darkness seemed alive, each shadow a sentient being watching us with malevolent intent. As the night deepened, I decided to brave the cold and stepped away from the warmth of the fire. I needed a moment to breathe, to shake off the oppressive weight of Jenna's story. The cool air wrapped around my skin, and I wandered a few feet into the trees, seeking solace among the evergreens. The silence pressed in, and I strained to hear anything beyond the sound of my own breathing. That was when I heard it, a faint giggling, distant yet unmistakable. It sliced through the stillness, sending a shiver down my spine. I stood rooted to the spot. Had Jenna conjured that sound with her tail? I glanced back toward the fire, where Matt was tossing another log onto the flames. Jenna was now quiet, her gaze seemingly lost in the depths of the night. I took a step back toward the fire, but the giggling rang out again, closer this time, teasing and taunting. My heart raced as I felt a primal urge to flee. I turned, navigating the forest with unsteady steps, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Branches creaked overhead, and the wind whispered secrets I couldn't comprehend. When I reached the fire, Jenna was staring into the flames, her face pale. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice strained. "Hear what?" Matt replied, oblivious, still focused on the fire. "Nothing," I mumbled, trying to shake the anxiety swelling in my chest. I sat back down, forcing myself to join their banter about the best hiking trails they had conquered in previous summers. Laughter bubbled up, but it felt brittle, like glass ready to shatter. The fire began to dwindle, and shadows lengthened, creeping closer. Suddenly, a rustling noise pierced the night, snapping me back to the tension that hung thick in the air. The sound came from beyond our little circle of light, a movement just beyond the trees. I squinted into the darkness, my heart thudding. "Did you hear that?" I blurted. Matt looked up, irritation flickering in his eyes. "You're being paranoid, Sam." But Jenna's face had transformed. She was rigid, her eyes wide. "No, I heard it too." My stomach twisted. I shot up, scanning the tree line, half expecting something to leap from the shadows. What if it's an animal? I ventured, trying to rationalize. Matt waved a dismissive hand. "It's probably just a raccoon or something. They can be pretty loud." "Or something bigger," Jenna added, her voice barely above a whisper. I shivered, feeling unease crawl up my spine. We resumed our casual talk, but the atmosphere was charged with anxiety. I caught glimpses of movement among the trees, shadows flitting just beyond our range of sight. It was more than my imagination. Something was out there, lurking, watching. As the night dragged on, the moon crested higher, casting an ethereal glow on the campsite. There was no more laughter, only the crackling flames and the suffocating weight of the silence. I felt the need to check the perimeter, to confirm whether we were alone, but I couldn't bring myself to voice it. Eventually, I excused myself to retrieve more firewood, using it as an excuse to step away from the tension. I stumbled into the underbrush, the moonlight barely penetrating through the dense foliage. A chill swept through the trees, and I hurried, my nerves on edge. That's when I heard it again, soft, childlike laughter. It floated through the woods like a haunting melody, drawing me in. I froze. The sound was unmistakable, both alluring and horrifying. I turned back toward the campsite, and an instinctual fear clawed at my gut. There was no safe distance, something was out there. But even more concerning was the fact that Matt and Jenna were no longer at the fire. I ran back to the clearing, heart pounding, only to find the area empty, the fire reduced to glowing embers. Matt. Jenna. I called out, my voice trembling. Silence answered, an echo of my fear. I searched the perimeter, dread tightening around my heart. A rustle sounded behind me, and I spun around, breath hitching in my throat. The shadows shifted, and in that stillness, I felt the weight of watching eyes, but I saw nothing. Guys? I called out again, desperation threading through my voice. But in the growing darkness, my words swallowed back into the night, and I stood alone, surrounded by the suffocating woods. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting elongated shadows that intertwined with the trees, creating an intricate web of darkness and uncertainty. My heart raced as I looked around the campsite, the laughter from earlier now replaced by an unsettling silence. The crackling of the campfire was my only companion, its flickering flames dancing to a rhythm only they understood. It had been a full day since we arrived, and I could still feel the weight of the forest pressing down on me. The others seemed unbothered, lost in their own stories and jokes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. Each rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sent shivers crawling down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was merely the wild, but an instinct, primal and deeply unsettling, gnawed at me. Are you going to sit there all night, or are you going to join us? Jenna's voice cut through my thoughts, pulling my attention back to the group. Her bright smile was a comfort, though it felt a little strained under the weight of the encroaching darkness. Just thinking, I replied, forcing a smile as I moved closer to the fire, its warmth seeping into my skin. I tried to focus on the laughter of my friends, but the unease lingered, a shadow in the back of my mind. About what? The ghost stories? Mark leaned back, his face illuminated by the firelight, eyes twinkling with mischief. Very funny, I muttered, forcing a chuckle. I still remembered the tales he had spun during our hike earlier that day, stories about campers who had vanished without a trace, the chilling conclusion that they had become part of the very woods that consumed them. The images had wormed their way into my thoughts, though I knew they were just tales meant to entertain foolish campers like us. As the night stretched on, one by one, my friends began to retreat to their tents, their laughter fading into the night air. Jenna was the last to leave, her silhouette briefly outlined against the glow of the fire. Don't stay up too late, she said, a hint of concern tinging her voice. You might miss something. I watched her disappear into the darkness, feeling the shift in the air once she was gone. The fire crackled, and I stirred it absently, wondering if I should follow suit and call it a night. But something held me back. Maybe it was the stories or the instinct that had taken root in my gut, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to stay awake, that something was waiting for me out there. I settled into my chair, pulling my jacket tighter around me, the chill of the forest creeping in. My eyes wandered to the edge of the clearing where the trees stood thick and uninviting, a wall of darkness looming just beyond the firelight. The shadows seemed to sway, as if alive, and I found myself fixated on them, searching for movement until my eyes ached. Minutes stretched, and the stillness became oppressive. I thought of the ghost stories again, conjuring images of figures lurking just out of sight, watching and waiting. I tried to shake it off, rationalizing that I was just being paranoid, but the feeling persisted, a cold weight in my chest. Then, in the quiet of the night, I heard a sound. A soft rustle, faint but distinct, emanating from the tree line. I sat up straighter, my heart thudding in my ears as I strained to listen. It came again, a far-off snap of a branch, the sound unmistakable. I was not alone. I glanced toward the tents, contemplating whether to call out for Jenna or the others. But another noise stilled my tongue, this one closer, muffled yet deliberate. Panic surged through me, and I took a deep breath, trying to quell the rising tide of fear. My gaze darted back to the trees, the darkness shifting as if something moved within it. "Hello?" I forced out, my voice trembling against the vastness of the night. Silence fell in response, a suffocating blanket that deepened my dread. The laughter and warmth of the campfire felt like a distant memory, replaced by an urgent need for escape. I stood slowly, eyes glued to the tree line. The instant I took a step away from the fire, an unmistakable whisper brushed against my ear. It felt like breath, cold and ancient. I spun around, but the clearing remained empty, the flames casting flickering shadows that danced across the ground. "Stop it, just stop it," I muttered to myself, trying to regain my composure. But I couldn't shake the sense that I had unwittingly beckoned something forth. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, and I took another reluctant step back toward the fire, feeling safety slip further away. Another rustle, louder this time. I froze, staring into the darkness. "Is someone there?" I called, a desperation creeping into my voice. The only response was the low whisper of the wind, twisting through the trees like a serpent. Then, as if answering my plea, a figure emerged from the shadows. For a split second, I thought it was Jenna returning, but the silhouette was too tall, too elongated. I squinted, heart racing, the firelight flickering against the figure. My breath caught as I realized it was not a friend. Fear froze me in place as I took in the sight before me. The figure stood still, motionless, its features obscured in darkness. It wore tattered clothing that blended seamlessly with the shadows, and its eyes glinted like sharp glass reflecting the firelight. I wanted to run, to scream, but my legs refused to move. I was trapped in that moment, caught between disbelief and terror, as the figure began to step forward, each movement deliberate, as if savoring the fear that gripped me. Finally, instinct kicked in, and I backed away from the fire, stumbling as I tore my gaze from the figure. My heart pounded, drowning out the sounds of the night. I turned and sprinted towards the tents, desperate to warn the others, to escape whatever this was. But as I dashed into the darkness, the realization hit me. I was no longer alone in the woods. And whatever had come forth from the shadows did not intend to let me go. The night wrapped around us like a thick fog, concealing even the faintest hint of moonlight. I sat on a log, glancing at the smoldering embers of our campfire, their glow flickering and waning as if they were whispering secrets. The sounds of the forest grew louder, each crack of a twig and rustle of leaves amplifying the oppressive silence that felt like a shroud over our small group. The stories had started around the fire, one by one, as we took turns sharing the urban legends that haunted our childhoods. It was supposed to be just harmless fun, but with each tale, the shadows stretched longer, and the air thickened with a tension that I couldn't shake. "Do you guys remember the one about the lost woods?" Jenna asked, her voice barely breaking the silence. She was the brave one among us, always the first to poke fun at the fears the rest of us harbored. But tonight, even she seemed uncertain. "They say if you wander in too deep, you'll never come out." "Yeah, right," Dave scoffed, but his bravado felt forced. He shifted uncomfortably on his seat, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting something to emerge from the trees. "It's just an old wives' tale, Jenna." "No, listen," she pressed on, her eyes widening. "There are stories about people who get lost for days. When they finally come out, they're different, you know? Scarred. Like the woods took something from them." I laughed nervously, but my heart raced at Jenna's words. The woods did feel different, almost alive. It was as if they were watching us, waiting. The campfire crackled, sending a shower of sparks into the air, and for a moment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the reach of our light. Then came the sound, a low, mournful wailing that echoed through the trees. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. The noise sent chills racing down my spine, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. We exchanged uneasy glances, each of us too afraid to voice our thoughts. It was only a few moments, but it felt like an eternity before Dave feigned a laugh, breaking the tension. "Very funny, guys." "Who's trying to scare who?" he said, but his voice trembled slightly, betraying his bravado. "Let's just go to bed," I suggested, eager to escape the oppressive darkness that seemed to close in on us. I could still feel the pulse of fear in the pit of my stomach, and I wanted nothing more than the safety of my tent. As we gathered our things, Jenna looked toward the tree-line, her expression drawn. "I'll take the first watch," she declared. "Just in case something comes out." "Don't be ridiculous," I protested. "We're fine. It's just the wind. We all need sleep." But Jenna was resolute. "Fine. Just be quiet and stay close. I don't like this place." Not one bit. We crawled into our tents, the fabric barely muffling the sounds from the outside world. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling of my tent, listening to the distant cries of the forest. A part of me wished Jenna would come in too. The other part of me knew she wouldn't. An hour passed, and I drifted between sleep and wakefulness. Just as I was beginning to doze off, I heard it again, the wailing. This time, it was closer. It seeped through the fabric of my tent, twisting into a pitiful moan that resonated deep within me. I sat up, heart pounding, and unzipped my tent just enough to peek out. The fire had died down to mere embers, casting long shadows over the campsite. Jenna was still sitting on that log, her silhouette tense and rigid. "Jenna," I whispered urgently. "What's going on?" She turned toward me, eyes wide, breath fogging in the cool air. "I don't know, but we need to leave. I think I saw someone." Before she could finish, a sudden rustling erupted from the trees, and I jumped back in alarm. Dave and Mark were out of their tents, their faces pale and terrified. "What was that?" Mark gasped, his voice frantic. "Did you hear it?" "Yeah," Dave breathed, keeping his eyes locked on the darkness. "We should stick together." "Let's pack up," I suggested, adrenaline coursing through me. "We can't just stay here." But before we could move, the wailing rose again, a spine-chilling sound that sent us scrambling. It was no longer a distant echo. It felt as if it was coming from the very heart of the woods. The trees trembled, branches swaying in the wind as if trying to warn us away. "Get back!" Jenna shouted, her face pale as she pointed into the dark. "There's something out there." We turned, fear coursing through our veins as we watched the shadows shift, something dark and amorphous lurking just beyond the trees. It was not human, not animal, a twisted figure that seemed to stretch and distort with every movement. The air thickened, and an overwhelming sense of dread settled into my bones. "Run!" I yelled, not caring if it were the right decision or not. We bolted, racing through the underbrush, the forest alive with the sound of our panicked breaths and the rustling behind us. The wailing grew louder, reverberating through the trees, pounding in my ears. I didn't stop. We didn't stop. All I knew was that whatever haunted us, it was relentless, and we had to escape before it swallowed us whole. The fire had dimmed to a flicker by the time I awoke, a cold sweat clinging to my skin. The darkness pressed against me, thick and suffocating, and for a moment, I struggled to remember where I was. The memories rushed back in fits and starts, the camping trip, the woods, the stories that haunted our nights. Despite the echo of laughter still lingering in my ears, the chill of fear crept back into my bones. I looked around the clearing, half expecting the shadows to leap from the trees, but there was nothing. Just the faint rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. I turned to check on Sarah and Mark, but their sleeping bags lay empty. Panic flared in my chest. I called out for them, my voice cracking in the stillness. No response, just the overwhelming silence of the woods. I swung my legs out of the tent, the ground cold against my bare feet. The fire pit was reduced to a pile of glowing embers, and I cautiously stepped toward it, scanning the perimeter of our campsite. Maybe they had gone for a walk, I told myself, though deep down, I knew that nothing good ever came from wandering the woods after dark. The night felt alive, every creak of branches and rustle of underbrush amplified in the still air. I felt the weight of unseen eyes watching me. I took a deep breath and called out again, louder this time. Sarah? Mark? The only answer was the whisper of the wind through the trees. A thought struck me like a bolt of lightning. The stories. If they had gone off to play a prank, it felt reckless, especially after the tales we had shared. Tales of campers who had vanished without a trace, the cryptic warnings from old-timers at the local diner. Had we been foolish to laugh them off? I grabbed my flashlight from the tent and flicked it on, the beam slicing through the darkness. I stepped away from the fire, the flickering glow fading behind me, and ventured into the trees. Each step felt heavy, my heart pounding in my chest as if it were echoing in time with the dull thud of my feet on the forest floor. The shadows shifted, creeping against the beams of light, and every crackle of twigs beneath my feet sent a surge of adrenaline through me. Sarah! I shouted, the name breaking into the stillness. Nothing. Just the soft sigh of the wind, brushing against the leaves like a ghostly whisper. I turned, feeling the unease creep deeper into my core. The woods felt different somehow, a living entity that was aware of my presence. Moving further, I thought I heard a laugh, distant but clear, slicing through the weighty silence. I quickened my pace, my pulse racing as I pushed through the undergrowth. The laughter faded, but it left a hollow feeling in my stomach. Were they trying to scare me? The thought made me feel foolish, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I stumbled upon a small clearing, the moonlight washing over the ground, and there I saw them, Sarah and Mark, huddled together, their faces pale and drawn. Relief washed over me, but it quickly turned to confusion. They looked frightened. Hey! What's going on? I asked, my voice laced with concern. They didn't respond immediately, their eyes darting around as if searching for something I couldn't see. There's something in the woods, Mark finally said, his voice low and trembling. What do you mean? Like a bear? I scoffed, trying to lighten the mood even as I felt a shiver race down my spine. No, not a bear. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. We heard something moving. It wasn't an animal. It felt wrong. My heart sank as I looked around. The trees loomed closer now, dark sentinels against a starless sky. What do you mean felt wrong? I pressed, trying to keep my own fear in check. Like it was watching us, Mark said, his eyes wide. We heard this sound, almost like someone throwing rocks at the tent. We thought it was you messing with us, but then we saw something move. What did you see? I asked, my voice tense. I don't know. Just something. Dark. It was quick. It was there and then gone, he stammered, shaking his head as if trying to shake off the memory. A heavy silence fell over us. I wanted to dismiss their fears, to tell them it was nothing, but a gnawing dread settled in my stomach. Let's just head back to the tent, I said, forcing my voice to sound steady. We'll be safer together. We started back, moving cautiously, our flashlights cutting paths through the darkness. Every rustle, every snap of a twig sent us jumping. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed, something lurking just out of sight, something that thrived in the shadows. When we reached the campsite, I felt a momentary sense of security, but it quickly faded. The fire pit had been disturbed, the embers were scattered, as if something had swept through while we were gone. I could feel Sarah and Mark's tension, their eyes darting to the tree line, and I drew the flashlight's beam toward the darkness, hoping to dispel the fear. Maybe we should pack up and head home, I suggested, though a part of me hesitated. The adventure should have been thrilling, but now it felt suffocating, the thrill replaced by an overwhelming sensation of dread. Before either could respond, a noise shattered the silence, a deep, guttural growl emanating from the woods. We froze, our breath caught in our throats as the sound reverberated through the night air. It was unlike anything I had ever heard before. It wasn't a natural sound, it was deliberate, almost mocking. "Run!" Sarah screamed, and just like that, fear turned to instinct as we fled, darting toward the safety of the car. The weight of the darkness bore down around us, and behind us, we could hear the rustling of leaves, something following, something that thrived on our fear. The night had truly become a nightmare, and as we sprinted into the unknown, the woods behind us seemed to close in, trapping us in a web of terror from which there was no escape. Story 6, Harvest of the Forgotten. The wind howled through the creaking wooden beams of the old farmhouse, rattling the window panes as though the house itself were groaning under the weight of the storm. I'd spent my childhood summers at Willow Creek Farm, my grandparents' property tucked away at the end of a long dirt road. It was a place of warmth, comfort, and laughter, where my imagination could wander freely through the golden fields and over the worn paths of the orchard. But as I stood at the threshold of the old house, now empty and decaying, the memories began to twist into something darker. I had returned to Willow Creek after my grandmother's unexpected passing, inheriting the property and its burdens all at once. The storm had rolled in that afternoon, the sky darkening ominously, giving the land a muted palette of grays and browns. The farm was supposed to be my sanctuary, but as I stepped inside, the air felt thick, as if the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. Dust motes danced in the beam of light that filtered through the grimy window, illuminating the old furniture draped in white sheets, like specters of my past. I pulled one of the sheets away from a chair, and the familiar scent of cedar and mothballs washed over me, mixed with something acrid that I couldn't place. I shivered, drawn not just by the memories but by an undercurrent of dread lurking just beyond the nostalgic haze. While unpacking my things, I found a small photograph of my grandmother standing by the barn, her sun-kissed skin glowing with happiness. I remembered her laughter echoing across the fields as she called me to help her with chores. That laughter felt like a memory from a different life, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that now enveloped the house. Nightfall crept in with the storm, and soon the wind roared like a living thing, shaking the battered farmhouse as I tried to settle in. The old radio crackled to life occasionally, picking up snippets of distorted news reports. I found myself glancing toward the window, half expecting to see a shadow moving through the sheets of rain. The power had flickered out about an hour ago, leaving me with the dim light of a single candle. I had planned to sleep early, but my body seemed to reject the idea, my mind racing through childhood memories like a film reel, each frame inhabited by my grandmother's warm smile and gentle voice. Yet beneath that warmth, I felt an unsettling emptiness, as if the house itself was mourning. Eventually, I wandered toward the kitchen, hoping to distract myself. The creaking floorboards sounded like whispers, and the shadows danced in the flickering candlelight. I reached for a mug, the ceramic cool against my fingers. I filled it with water, my movements automatic, but unease prickled at the back of my mind. That's when I heard it, a faint scratching noise coming from outside, barely discernible over the howling wind. My heart raced, instinctively amplifying the sound. I brushed it off, convincing myself it was just the wind playing tricks with the old barn doors. I finished my drink and prepared to head upstairs to bed, but the noise persisted. It was rhythmic, insistent, almost like a desperate plea. I stepped outside, the rain hitting my skin like tiny needles. I squinted into the dark, searching for the source of the sound. The barn stood looming in the distance, its silhouette stark against the stormy sky. The scratching intensified, and I felt an inexplicable pull toward it. As I approached, the door creaked open slightly, revealing a sliver of darkness. I hesitated, a surge of apprehension flooding through me. The barn had been a sanctuary for my grandparents, a place of laughter and stories, but now it felt like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. I pushed the door open fully, the hinges groaning in protest, and peered inside. The smell hit me first, a mix of damp hay and something rancid, like old meat left to rot in the summer sun. My heart thudded in my chest as I stepped inside. The weak candlelight cast long shadows across the space, revealing a disarray of tools and equipment, all covered in a layer of dust. The scratching sound had ceased, leaving only the relentless pounding of rain against the roof. Just then, a movement caught my eye from the corner of the barn. I squinted into the darkness, barely catching sight of something small and furry darting behind a stack of wooden crates. A rat, I thought, but as I approached, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't just a rat, it seemed to be something larger, something that had been disturbed. And there, beside the wall, I found a shallow hole, exposed earth where the floor had deteriorated. My breath hitched as the gnawing feeling in my gut intensified. It wasn't just an animal. Something had been burrowing there, something that shouldn't have been. The ground was soft and disturbed, and as I knelt to examine it, I felt the cold sweat of fear trickling down my spine. I had come back to Willow Creek searching for solace, but as I stared down into the dark earth and felt the storm rage around me, I realized I might have stumbled upon something far more sinister than I ever expected. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the fields where the corn stood tall, rustling anxiously in the evening breeze. I had spent the day retracing my steps, trying to make sense of the eerie happenings on the farm. Every corner of the land seemed to whisper tales of dread, stories that clung to the air like the stale scent of rot. As night fell, I took refuge in the old farmhouse, grateful for the creaking wooden floors beneath my feet. Where once the house had felt like a sanctuary, it now loomed like a forgotten sentinel, its cracked windows watching me with 1,000 lifeless eyes. I couldn't shake the feeling that something watched me in return, lurking just beyond the threshold of the familiar, waiting for darkness to claim me fully. I had discovered a few more peculiarities that day. In the barn, I found a shattered mirror, its edges jagged and slick with dust. The shards reflected warped versions of my face, twisting features into grotesque caricatures. I recoiled as if I'd stumbled upon a graveyard of nightmares. What happened here? The question echoed in my mind, a relentless drumbeat that refused to fade, each pulse amplifying the weight of the silence that surrounded me. I clutched the old journal I had unearthed from the attic, its pages yellowed and frayed. My heart raced as I read the fractured sentences, ink smudged by time and some darker force. The entries chronicled strange events, disappearances, and a growing unease that had settled upon the land. The previous owners had documented it all, the shadows that moved of their own volition, the inexplicable sounds at night, the animals that acted unnaturally, their eyes reflecting a fear I could almost touch. The final entry chilled me to the bone. They come when the moon is full. They take what they can and leave behind the husk of what was once living. The implication hung heavy in the air as I sat there, candlelight flickering, casting ghostly shapes on the walls. I tossed the journal aside, but it felt as if the words had branded themselves into my memory, a grim reminder that whatever happened here was far from over. Sleep was a fickle companion that night. My dreams twisted and turned like the gnarled roots of the ancient oak outside. I was back in the fields, but the comforting golden stalks of corn had turned black, their leaves brittle and sharp like bones. Shadows danced among them, whispering secrets that clawed at the edges of my sanity. The moon hung low and full, casting an otherworldly glow that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I awoke in a cold sweat, the chill of the room lapping around me like a shroud. A sound resonated through the stillness, an eerie, drawn-out wail, echoing from somewhere deep within the farm. My heart raced as I crept toward the window, peering out at the trepidation beyond. The moonlight bathed the land in an unholy luminescence, and I could see the cornstalks swaying gently, almost beckoning me. Gathering my resolve, I slipped on my boots and stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking underfoot. I moved toward the barn, each step growing heavier as the night air thickened around me. The haunting sound fell silent, replaced by a stillness that felt almost expectant. I reached the barn door, and it swung open as if inviting me inside. The smell hit me first, a rancid blend of decay and earth. It enveloped me as I crossed the threshold, every instinct screaming for me to turn back. The darkness inside was oppressive, swallowing the light from the moon outside. I fumbled for the flashlight I had tucked into my pocket, its beam cutting through the shadows in jagged bursts. The barn was even more chaotic than I remembered. Tools lay strewn across the floor, cobwebs clinging to the rafters like ghostly curtains. But it was the far corner that drew my gaze, an unnatural shape huddled there, shrouded in darkness. I edged closer, my breath a shallow whisper in the stillness. As my light fell upon it, I staggered back, the beam trembling in my grasp. It was a mound of something bodies, I thought at first, but my mind rejected the notion. It was too small, too contorted. I stepped closer, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. The truth settled in like cold ice. It was a mass of small, twisted forms. Animals, but not like any I had seen before. Their bone-thin bodies were grotesquely elongated, and their eyes glimmered with a feral intelligence. The wail returned, louder this time, echoing through the barn. I spun on my heel, heart racing as I was gripped by a primal instinct to flee. But as I turned, I froze. The entrance to the barn was no longer an escape but a dark maw, a void that withheld the safety of the outside world. Whatever had been lurking in the shadows had emerged. I could see the outlines of figures, distorted shapes rippling like smoke. They moved with an unnatural fluidity, their forms shifting in and out of focus, their intentions unreadable. Panic surged through me as I stumbled backward, my flashlight beam flickering wildly. The animals began to hiss and shriek, their cries mingling with my own rising terror. In that moment, I realized the truth. The farm was not merely a place, it was alive, and I had wandered into its depths, uninvited. The shadows danced around me, tightening their grip as the moon hung heavy in the sky, a silent witness to my descent into madness. I turned to run, heart pounding, but a cold presence pressed against my back, halting me in my tracks. The darkness had teeth, and they were hungry. The sun hung low in the sky as I stood on the porch, the wooden boards creaking beneath my feet like the bones of a long-forgotten creature. The air was thick with the humidity that clung to my skin, and the pungent smell of damp earth and livestock filled my nostrils. I had grown accustomed to the isolation of the farm since arriving, but an unsettling weight had settled on my shoulders like a thick fog. The events of the past few days replayed in my mind like a relentless loop. I had come to this farm seeking solace and a chance to reconnect with my roots. Instead, I had stumbled onto something dark and sinister lurking in the shadows. The locals had warned me about the previous owners, the Graysons, and their sudden disappearance, but I had chalked it up to small-town gossip. Now, those whispered tales felt like a noose tightening around my throat. I had intended to explore the barn further, but every time I approached the weathered structure, a chill crawled up my spine, urging me to turn back. It was a relic of the past, with its sagging roof and rusted tools, but more than its dilapidation, it was the feeling that something unspeakable had taken root inside its walls that kept me at bay. I had convinced myself that I was imagining things, that the shadows were simply the effect of the fading light. Yet, deep down, I knew I was lying. As darkness fell, I decided to prepare dinner, the mundane task a feeble attempt to distract myself from the gnawing anxiety. I worked through the motions, chopping vegetables and stirring the pot until the kitchen filled with the fragrant aroma of herbs and simmering broth. The sound of my knife against the cutting board echoed in the silence, each chop reverberating like a heartbeat in the stillness. Yet, the more I cooked, the more I felt a presence watching me, lurking just beyond the threshold of my awareness. That night, I settled into bed, the crisp sheets feeling foreign against my skin. Sleep eluded me as I stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster that resembled jagged scars. The creaking of the old house became a symphony of unease, every groan and whistle playing on my nerves. I could have sworn I heard whispers, soft, unintelligible murmurs that sent chills racing up my spine. I nestled deeper into the covers, but the warmth offered little comfort. In the early hours of the morning, I was jolted awake by a loud crash that echoed through the house. My heart raced as I sat up, straining my ears to catch any further sounds. The silence that followed felt oppressive, thick like smoke. I waited, breath caught in my throat, hoping it had been a figment of my imagination. After several moments, I finally mustered the courage to swing my legs over the side of the bed and press my feet against the cold wooden floor. I crept down the hallway, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The house felt alive, as if it were listening to my every move. I reached the staircase and paused, glancing back at the darkness that loomed behind me. A shiver ran down my spine, but I pressed on, drawn by an inexplicable urge to uncover the source of the noise. The kitchen was dark, illuminated only by the dim light filtering through the window. My heart hammered in my chest as I opened the door, the hinges protesting with a slow creak. I flicked the switch, and the overhead bulb flickered to life, casting a pale glow across the room. My stomach twisted at the sight that met me. The pot I had left on the stove was tipped over, its contents spilling across the counter like entrails. The floor was slick with broth, and the once comforting scent now turned rancid, twisting in the air like a sickly sweet perfume. I stepped closer, my pulse quickening as I noticed something glimmering in the mess, a small, bloody shard of something that looked suspiciously like a bone. My mind raced as I stumbled backward, eyes darting around the room in a panic. I grasped the edges of the counter, feeling the cold surface beneath my fingers as I fought to steady my breathing. This was no accident, something had done this, something malicious and hidden. A faint scraping sound echoed from the corner of the room, and I turned to see something move in the shadows. My heart dropped as a figure stepped into the light, an old woman, her skin as pale as the moon, hair wild like weeds entangled by time. Her eyes, sunken and hollow, gleamed with a haunting intensity that sent a jolt of terror through me. "Leave," she rasped, her voice a brittle whisper, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 warnings. "Leave before it takes you too." I couldn't find my voice, frozen in disbelief as I stared into her gaunt face. She raised a twisted finger, pointing toward the door, her gaze piercing into my soul. Without thinking, I turned and fled, stumbling through the darkness and out into the cool night air. I sprinted toward the fence line, the moonlight illuminating the path like a ghostly guide, but the sound of footsteps echoed behind me, relentless and hungry. The farm was alive with whispers, the wind carrying the voices of the vanished Graysons, and I was becoming another thread in their tapestry of despair. I had thought I could find peace among the dirt and decay, but I was wrong. The farm was not a sanctuary, it was a trap, and I was already ensnared. The following morning, I woke to an oppressive silence that settled heavily around the farm. The sun was a mere glow behind thick clouds, casting the world into a muted gray haze. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my heart racing as I recalled the events of the night before. The crashing sound, the cattle's frantic lowing, and the sensation of being watched, it all played back in my mind like a broken record. I had hoped sleep would grant me some reprieve, but my dreams were haunted by shadowy figures lurking just beyond the edges of my consciousness. As I stepped into the kitchen, the air felt thick, as if the very walls held their breath. I glanced around, half expecting to see David's familiar form hunched over a cup of coffee. But the kitchen was empty, the muddled remnants of last night's dinner still lingering on the table. I poured a cup of coffee, the bitter scent grounding me, but the unease refused to dissipate. I needed to get outside, to breathe in fresh air and shake off the growing dread. The moment I stepped outside, the wind rushed past, cold and biting. I pulled my jacket tighter around myself, scanning the yard for any sign of life. The animals remained restless, showing signs of agitation I'd never noticed before. The chickens clucked wildly, darting around their coop, and the cows bellowed as if they sensed something lurking beyond the trees. As I approached the barn, I noticed the door was slightly ajar, swinging on rusted hinges as if inviting me inside. My heart thumped louder in my chest. I hesitated, recalling the strange noises I had heard echoing from within the dark structure. But curiosity gnawed at me, urging me to push through the fear. I stepped inside, the smell of hay and animal musk wrapping around me like a shroud. Shadows cloaked the corners, and I squinted to peer into the darkness, hoping to catch sight of the tractor, the tools, or anything familiar. As I moved deeper into the barn, I could hear my footsteps echoing back at me, each sound amplified by the hollow space. I reached for the light switch and flicked it on, but only a feeble bulb flickered to life, casting a sickly yellow glow. Dust motes danced in the air, and I took a deep breath, trying to shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Right there in the center of the barn stood the old feeding trough, but it was no longer empty. A layer of something dark and viscous coated the bottom, glistening ominously. I approached cautiously, my heart racing as I leaned closer to inspect it. There was something unsettling about the texture, something that sent bile rising in my throat. I forced myself to reach down and touch it, and the moment my fingers broke the surface, I recoiled. It was warm, almost alive, and the sight of it sent a wave of nausea crashing over me. Just then, a crash echoed from the corner of the barn, followed by a low growl that sent my blood running cold. I spun around, eyes wide, searching the shadows for the source of the sound. The growl deepened, reverberating through the wood beams, and my heart raced, pounding against my ribs. I turned to flee, but as I did, something brushed against my leg, rough and furry. I shrieked, stumbling backward as the barn door swung shut with a resounding thud, cutting off my escape. Panic surged through me, and I clawed at the door, but it was stuck fast. The growl intensified, and I turned to find a pair of glowing eyes staring at me from the shadows, a large animal, its silhouette creeping closer. Fear paralyzed me as it stepped into the light. It was unlike any creature I had seen before. Its fur was matted and dirty, tinged with the same dark substance from the trough. Its jaws were twisted into a snarl, teeth yellowed and sharp, dripping with something that looked disturbingly like blood. It advanced slowly, considering me as if I were prey. I had to think fast. I glanced around the barn, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. The old pitchfork caught my eye, propped against the wall nearby. I scrambled toward it, heart racing as I seized the wooden handle, trying to steady my trembling hands. As I turned to confront the beast, it lunged forward, and I swung the pitchfork wildly, missing its target but managing to drive it back a few paces. It yelped, the sound a terrible mixture of pain and fury. I could feel its breath on my face, hot and rancid. In that moment, I realized this creature was not just a wild animal. It was something far more sinister, a manifestation of all the darkness that surrounded the farm. The growl morphed into a howl, and I felt the floor tremble beneath me. With a burst of adrenaline, I dashed toward the door, frantically pushing against it, praying it had somehow loosened. I could hear the creature behind me, its claws skidding on the floor as it pursued me with unrelenting speed. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pounded on the door, desperation clawing at my throat. Finally, with one last shove, the door burst open, and I stumbled into the light of the day. I didn't look back as I ran, my heart racing as I sprinted toward the house. The chilling howl echoed behind me, a haunting reminder of the darkness I had unwittingly invited into my life. I needed to warn David, needed to find safety before whatever haunted this farm turned its sights on me. Breathless, I raced up the steps, my mind racing with fear. What had I awakened? What had lingered in the shadows, waiting for me to uncover the truth? I rushed inside, slamming the door behind me, bracing myself against it as I tried to catch my breath. I didn't know what was coming next, but I felt it in my bones. Something far worse was yet to come. The air pressed down on me with an unsettling heaviness, as if the very atmosphere was crawling with dread. It had been days since I last saw sunlight, the sun setting behind the hills, the sky devoured by thick clouds, a darkness that felt alive. Each dawn brought with it the same ominous fog that hovered over Millstone Farm, clinging to the ground like the grasp of a long-forgotten specter. I stood in the barn, the scent of damp hay and rusted metal numbing my senses. The old wooden beams creaked above me, echoing the memories of all that had transpired in the past week. For each second spent in that forsaken place, my unease deepened, gnawing at the edges of my mind like a hungry rat. I had been trying to push through the gloom, to pretend that nothing had changed. I fed the animals, though their eyes seemed to hold a knowing glance that I could not shake. The old rooster, Cluck, had stopped crowing altogether, and the cows would sometimes stare at me with an unblinking intensity, as if they were judging me, weighing my worth. That scrutiny felt suffocating, a collective judgment from creatures that had been mere bystanders before. The night deepened quickly, draping the farm in inky blackness. I locked the barn door, an instinctive move. My heart raced, each thump echoing in my ears like a war drum. I had grown used to the sounds of the farm, the distant rustle of corn stalks, the soft rustling of small creatures in the grass. But tonight, there was something different. A silence descended, heavy and oppressive, broken only by the occasional caw of a crow or the rustle of the wind. I fetched my flashlight from my jacket pocket, its beam flickering as I stepped outside. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing the crooked path leading to the fields. For a moment, I hesitated. I recalled the chilling encounter with Lee, the old farmer who had warned me about the land's dark history, tales of lost souls and cursed harvests. Shadows danced in my peripheral vision, making me question if I truly was alone. I took a deep breath and forced myself to move, the beam of light guiding my way, illuminating the path ahead. I made my way toward the old cornfield, where the rows of maize loomed like soldiers frozen in time. The corn rustled ominously under the gusts of wind, whispering secrets I couldn't comprehend. Then I saw it, a figure at the edge of the field, partially obscured by the tall stalks. My heart stopped. I squinted, trying to confirm my eyes weren't deceiving me. The figure stood motionless, a silhouette against the ghostly backdrop of the corn. It was too tall, too unmoving. I called out, my voice trembling, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No response, just the rustle of the corn, intensifying as if something had stirred within. I stepped closer, my pulse quickening with every footfall. The figure shifted slightly, and I froze, terror clawing its way up my throat. I turned on my flashlight, and the beam sliced through the dark, illuminating a twisted, gnarled tree stump that had been hidden in the shadows. It was just a stump, nothing more, yet my heart raced with the remnants of fear. But then, I heard it, a sound, soft yet unmistakable. The creaking of wood, followed by a low, mournful wail. I turned, the light catching the edges of the field, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw more figures, hunched shapes moving among the corn. I stumbled backward, panic welling up inside me. The stories Lee had shared came rushing back, and I felt the weight of them settle on my shoulders. I turned and ran. The light bounced wildly, illuminating the path back to the barn, my breath quick and jagged. The earth felt unsteady beneath my feet, as if it might swallow me whole. The memories of the lost souls haunted me, their cries echoing in my mind, urging me to flee. I slammed the barn door shut behind me, the sound reverberating in the stillness. My heart pounded in sync with the echo, drowning out the unsettling quiet. I leaned against the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps, trying to make sense of what had just transpired. But it didn't end there. The silence was abruptly shattered. A rustling sound, sharp and jarring, came from outside. I crept toward the window, peering through the grimy glass to catch a glimpse of what lurked in the night. Shadows loomed beyond the barn, swirling and shifting unnaturally, and I knew I wasn't alone anymore. The flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. I swallowed hard, fear gripping my throat like a vice. My heart raced, and I felt the cold touch of dread creep over my skin. I was trapped in this tomb of shadows, surrounded by the remnants of a past that was clawing its way to the surface. A low growl reverberated from outside, sending chills racing down my spine. I backed away from the window, my instinct screaming at me to escape. I fumbled for the door, but a sudden, deafening noise erupted from the roof. It felt as if something heavy had landed up there, shuffling, dragging. Whatever it wasn't done with me yet. I picked up a pitchfork that had been leaning against the wall, my hands trembling. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever horror awaited me. Would the creatures of the night reveal themselves? Or was I about to discover a deeper darkness lurking within the heart of Millstone Farm? As the growling intensified, I knew I had only one option left: to face the nightmare head-on, or to be consumed by it.